Участники, мы рады вас приветствовать на третьем дне
Dear
нашего.
ladies and gentlemen, we're pleased to greet you at the third day of our forum, of the session dedicated to sustainable water resources in Central Asia. Before we start our session, I would like to ask all the participants to pay attention to the following technical issues. Throughout the whole forum, including this session, we're providing simultaneous translation to both English and Russian, so please find a globe sign and press it and choose the language of your preference. Please also note that to be able to have this function available, you have to make sure that the Zoom application is installed on your computer. To be able to leave a comment or ask a question, please use the Q&A chat or the chat function that are also available in the bottom of the screen. We will try to answer all your questions after our speakers' presentations. If there are any questions that are unanswered, they will be readdressed to speakers directly. If you have any questions, technical questions, please write them in the chat box, and the forum organizers will try to get a hold of you as soon as possible to tackle those issues. All information on the session, including information on speakers and presentations, will be available on the website of the forum. The address of the website and the forum, and the YouTube channel are published in the chat box. So let's start with our session. Central Asia, as many other regions of the world, has faced the lack of and the shortage of water resources during the increasing demand for water during the summer period. The increase of growth of population and growth of economy raises the demand for water resources, while the climate changes as well, which creates an additional pressure for sustainable and timely supply of water resources. All this requires immediate actions to reduce risks of social, economic, and environmental areas. The region requires significant financial investments, for example, to upgrade recreational infrastructure, but at the same time, steps should be taken to reduce the overall demand for water through effective use of water resources. It is undoubted that all these problems cannot be tackled exclusively by the governments of the countries of Central Asia. The private sector is called for to play an important role in providing their skills and resources, and for that they have their own interests. As such, the lack of a deficit of water, high cost of energy, power, and pollution of water resources may create risks for businesses, specifically for agricultural development. During our session, we will consider issues related to water resource management in Central Asia, as well as steps that are being undertaken currently in the Central Asian region. This session is organized with the support of the regional program of USAID on water resources and environment. The program is aimed at promoting approaches of interconnectivity between nexus water, food security, and energy, environmental protection, or so-called nexus approach in the Central Asian countries, and to engage governments, private sector, and all stakeholders in improvement of water management in the region. In the beginning of our session, with the welcoming address, I would like to turn the floor to His Highness, the Ambassador of the United States of America in Uzbekistan, Mr. Daniel Rosenberg. Mr. Daniel Rosenblum was nominated as an ambassador of Uzbekistan in May 2019. Since July 2014 until July 2018, Mr. Rosenblum was working as a deputy assistant of the Secretary of State at the Bureau of State Department of South and Central Asia. He was responsible for managing the U.S. policy and diplomatic relations with the 5 countries of Central Asia. In 2008 and 2014, Mr. Rosenblum was a coordinator of U.S. assistance to Europe, Eurasia, and Central Asia, and responsible for ensuring strategic and effective distribution of budget and external assistance for the amount of around $1 billion a year. Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
On behalf of the United States, it's my honor to welcome you to Sustainable Water for Central Asia session at the 11th Annual Central Asia Trade Forum. This year marks 30 years of successful cooperation between the United States and the countries of Central Asia. The United States was the first country to recognize the independence of all 5 of the Central Asian countries. Over the past 30 years, we have worked closely with all countries in the region to promote regional peace and stability, to strengthen civil society, and to increase economic growth, energy, and water security. The U.S. has contributed more than $9 billion to support and strengthen the sovereignty and independence of the Central Asian states. We have also invested $34 million in the C5+1 regional platform, which focuses in particular on security, economic connectivity, and environmental issues. Speaking of challenges, as we all know, water resource management remains one of the most serious and complex issues in this region. The 5 countries of Central Asia must balance their very limited water supplies with growing populations and growing economies in the face of a rapidly changing climate. The U.S. government, through the U.S. Agency for International Development, will continue to promote stability, economic prosperity, and healthy ecosystems in Central Asia by implementing transboundary water programs that allow the region to effectively manage shared water resources. We're very proud to partner with the governments of all 5 Central Asian countries as they continue to take positive steps to enhance cooperation aimed at achieving security in water. Effective water management is absolutely essential for the sustainable development of the region. And that's why in October of 2020, USAID launched the Regional Water and Vulnerable Environment Activity, or WAVE, which is supporting all Central Asian countries to address ongoing challenges in the water sector. We've been encouraged by the fact that the governments of Central Asia all recognize the importance of efficient water management and the need for innovation and for private sector engagement to solve all of those challenges. Today's session and the Central Asia Trade Forum in general are important opportunities to explore and discuss these pressing issues with a focus on possible approaches and solutions. We really need together to explore and identify the next steps for introducing innovative technologies and approaches, for forming new partnerships, and increasing private sector participation to solve the region's water challenges. Today, we all reaffirm our commitment towards sustainable management of water resources in order to build a more stable, globally connected, and prosperous Central Asia. Thank you all for joining us. So now let's get to work and enjoy the forum and this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your presentation, for the support by the United States, that the United States provides to the Central Asian region and promoting the Nexus approach. Moving along on the agenda, let's consider the Central Asian region from the standpoint of the use of water resources and the importance of water resources in the trade turnover in Central Asia. For the presentation, I'd like to turn the floor to Mr. Sultan Brahimzadeh, the chairman of the Executive Committee of the International Fund for Saving the RLC. Mr. Brahimzadeh is well known as a reformer who initiated the process of reforming the water sector in Tajikistan in 2016 by lobbying development and adoption of a number of strategic, political, and legislative documents. Mr. Brahimzadeh is also a recognized water diplomat. He's actively promoting and defending issues of water resources on a global level. Since January 2021, Mr. Brahimzadeh has been a co-chairman of the International Consultative Body of the Dushanbe Water Process. Mr. Rahim Zoda, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Katya. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for a WAVE project for organizing this very interesting session dedicated to a very important issue and for giving me a possibility to present during this session. I would like to also take this opportunity and on behalf of the Executive Committee of the IFS, I would like to express my gratitude to the government of the United States of America and to USAID for the assistance that they provide to the countries of the region and also for the organization of such an important forum, which will contribute to solution of discussion and discussion of different ways to tackle different problems. Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for your involvement in this and participation during the session. I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation to your government for assisting the countries in the region, specifically through the C5+1 platform that you mentioned in your presentation. As for my presentation, I would like to say that the proposed subject was a little bit difficult for me, but I found this subject very interesting to join the session and to actually look at it from the standpoint of how water and which role the water plays in the trade turnover in the Central Asian region. And I found several facts that I would like to share with you. You can share your presentation yourself. Okay, I'll try to do that. Yes, we can see that. Can you see it? Yes, we can see it well, but I would like to start by talking about the role the water plays in the Central Asian region in general. And water plays an important role and it's probably the most important role in the social economic development of the region and is a key link in providing peace and stability in the Central Asian region. Considering the transboundary nature of water resources in the region, and about 30% of regional GDP is gained through the irrigated agriculture in our economy, which is about 25% of generated power that is generated by water power stations, and being such an important link in stability and peace and cooperation, water is not a commodity in our region, and we all know that. And it's not involved in directly involved in the trade turnover. But there is a term, virtual water, and here, this is the water that is part of the produce that is available and circulates in the trade turnover, and that plays an important role and makes a big contribution in this and trade in the region. As an example, there is only one country in the world where water is recognized as a commodity. It has a water market, which is Australia. I apologize. Could you please choose the language? Otherwise, the interpreters it would be difficult for the interpreters to translate you.
Язык, пожалуйста.
Так, минуточку, мне надо найти теперь это. Перевода здесь сейчас. Так, перевод русский, да?
Да, русский выберите, чтобы переводчик.
Please choose Russians for the interpreters to be able to translate you, otherwise they cannot hear you. Let's try. I apologize. Can the interpreters hear me? Yes, everything is fine. They can hear us well. I apologize. There is only one country in the world that recognizes water as a commodity, which is Australia. However, we're hearing news around that indicates that the significance of water as a commodity goes up. For example, in December 2020, we heard the news that the Chicago Commodity Exchange in the United States started trading water along with oil and gold. So that's a signal, and and we believe that in the long term, I think we should be ready. That probably, regardless of the whether we want it or not, but should be ready to such developments, to see such developments. But let's go to the fact that virtual water that plays a role in the trade in Central Asian region. This is just an example from Tajikistan that and agricultural production, and actually we see water, the excess of water in the summertime, but in 2019, for example, export power was 7.7% of overall exports in Tajikistan. In 2020, it was 4.1%. I'll tell you why. Because in the middle of the summer, due to the impact of climate change and abrupt reduction of water resources, Tajikistan had to stop and seize exports of power and electricity to neighboring countries. And this is what dictated this dynamics and reduction of the share of hydropower that was exported outside of Tajikistan. Of course, about 80% of agricultural produce is made with the use of water. And if we look at the structure of the country's exports for Tajikistan, agricultural produce export in Tajikistan accounts for 10%. In Kazakhstan, it's 7%. For Kyrgyzstan, it's 15%. For Turkmenistan, unfortunately, I couldn't find these numbers, but for Uzbekistan, it's 10%. These are approximate numbers. And if we look deeper, we can find different important components that indicate the extent to which water is important in development of our economies.
I would also like to mention another fact, that the virtual water per se in Central Asia is not used practically, and there is no tracking or monitoring or accounting of the virtual water consumption in Central Asian region, or no one is really checking what is the share of our trade balance. However, nevertheless, the virtual water does play a role in exports of commodities and agricultural produce. And for us, recreation tourism is very important. And of course, there are lots of and many tourists visiting our different agricultural resources, including water resources. And this is very important, including for Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, who are the tourist countries. And tourism capacity, tourism potential has to do with water resources. But when I spoke about actually the Chicago Stock Exchange speaking about water, is a very alarming signal, because the water level in the region hints at the potential crisis situation. If we look at this slide, then in 1960, we had 28.4 cubic meters of water per capita, but now it's under 2,000, under 4,000 liters. And actually, this indicator has increased twofold, and it means that by 2040, we will pass or will reach the critical threshold where the water per capita will be 1,000 cubic meters, and then our region will turn into a water shortage region, and that requires us to undertake some measures, requires us to streamline our collaboration and cooperation, so that we could be ready for development of these kind of situations, to undertake measures to adapt to this kind of event, and to make our economy and our society more sustainable, more resilient when it comes to this kind of trends and this kind of situations. Of course, should this kind of situation evolve, and it is quite possible that water will turn into a commodity. That's exactly what's happening in Australia. In Australia, in fact, this was the factor that has driven the commodification of water. And in order to push people or to stimulate people, treat water carefully, treat water efficiently, and treat water as a vitally important resource. A number of measures that we're proposing are here on this slide, and these are the measures to ensure efficient water use in the region. This is something that will help us prevent commodification of water. Well, under the circumstances, when we do have the climate change, that you, Ekaterina, has mentioned in your introductory speech, that the drought of this year was pretty evidentiated that fact. Actually, I had a presentation and the internet was I checked the situation yesterday, and actually there were lots of news, lots of messages in the internet about the drought causing the deaths of animals, deaths of cattle, the shortage of pasture, shortage of grazing lands, and so on. In fact, these are all alarming signs that should push us towards changing the water resource management to make sure that in the future we will be able to supply necessary water resources to all the consumers. Well, infrastructure is obsolete. It needs to be modernized. It requires and demands the modernization, and it will contribute to more efficient use of water resources and energy resources. We need to shift to water efficient technologies of irrigation, which will let us more efficiently use water resources in our region. Well, we do know, you do know that more than 10,000 cubic meters is used for irrigation of 1 hectare, whereas the water efficiency technologies in irrigation will allow us reduce the water supply by 2 or 3-fold for the same agricultural cultures, agricultural produce, and actually it will lead to more efficient use of agricultural land as well as water resources. We need to account and monitor water resources. There need to be some economic stimuli to push people, to push consumers towards water efficiency and water saving. And of course, the key, the cornerstone for this is the regional collaboration between the countries. And actually, this is absolutely paramount that we do have regional collaboration, because without one, we won't be able to introduce all the above mentioned measures. This is what I tried to compile about this very topic. I'll be happy to answer the questions of the participants. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sultan, for your very interesting presentation, for your very interesting review. And I believe that our participants will have many, many questions. Please do submit your questions to the Q&A box or to the chat if that's more accessible to you. As we can see from Mr. Sultan's presentation, we cannot continue developing the region without considering number of factors and number of sectors of the economy. At the same time, the growing challenges and related climate change, demographic growth, and the need to increase and intensify the economic development require us to find the most suitable solutions for the region. Well, in continuation of the conversation, I would like to give the floor to Annette Huber-Lee, the senior scholar of the Stockholm Institute of Environment, the United States, and she will speak about the process of evidence-based decision-making for long-term planning. Dr. Annette Huber-Lee has more than 25 years of experience of international planning and water resource management, with an accent, with a stress on improving the well-being and improvement of the ecosystem. Climate change is one of the central components of her work. At present, she is the head of the 3 main programs on interconnection of water resources, energy, agriculture, environment, using the best practices of supporting the decision-making in Africa, Central Asia, and in the Near East. Annette, the floor is yours. Please do not forget that interpretation is being provided, and then you need to pace yourself, and you may also want to select the English channel, and you can also share your presentation. You've been granted that right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ekaterina. Thank you for this opportunity. I am so grateful to have this opportunity to speak and to be part of this distinguished panel. I was really inspired by both Ambassador Rosenblum and Mr. Rahimzodeh and their emphasis on the priority that we need to give to water in the region. So let me try to share my presentation. And see if this can work here. I don't know if you can see the presentation. Is it okay?
Yes, it's okay, but
Okay.
well,
You see the
no,
preview
we
of the
can
next.
see, no, we can see only half a presentation. Can you try to do it again?
I think it might be better for you to
Yeah,
share.
yeah,
if
okay,
that's
please
okay.
stop your sharing your screen and I will share the screen. Can you see it now? Mhm. Yeah, now it's okay. Yes, you can see it.
Yes, I can see. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you again. And thank you for the opportunity to speak. I consider myself very fortunate to be able to be a part of the WAVE activity that was described by the ambassador, and to play a role in demonstrating how cooperation in the region can increase the water, energy, food, and ecosystem security for both individual countries in the region, sectors, as well as for the region as a whole. I really want to emphasize security in what I'm about to speak about, and in particular, to talk about security in the face of deep uncertainty. And I'd like to convey that to you in a very personal sort of way that, at least for myself, I don't know about for you, I feel like for the last 5 years, I'm hearing every summer, let's say it's the hottest June on record, it's the hottest July on record. Actually, it's the hottest summer on record. And I think it's about time that we kind of reframe how we're thinking about what's happening with respect to climate change, that it's not that it's the hottest summer on record in 2021. It is in fact the coolest summer for the next 100 or so years. That everything that we are experiencing now is a lighter version of what we're about to experience. We know that with climate change, that we're going to experience more frequent extremes, more intense extremes, and we need to be ready for those extreme and highly uncertain events. And what we're trying to do in the WAVE activity is to learn how we can collectively prepare for the kind of uncertainty that we're facing that will get more extreme going into the future. So as was expressed by the prior two speakers and Ekaterina, I mean, this region has a sort of the, the perfect storm, right? The climate is changing in ways that we can't predict. We have competing interests for water resources across sectors and across countries, and at least to date, fairly limited cooperation. So this, in the context of the work that I will do together with my colleagues in the Stockholm Environment Institute, we'll combine two fundamental methods or approaches. The first of this is to use a water, energy, food ecosystem nexus approach. It allows us to look at how do these sectors and the planning around these sectors intersect with one another, both in positive and negative ways. So when we think about this and contrasting about how we've done planning in the past, we tend to be very siloed in how we think about planning. We think about planning energy in the energy sector, water in the water sector, ag in the ag sector, and ecosystems sometimes doesn't even get to the table. But what critically happens when we look within a single sector is that we often don't look at what sometimes are positive consequences, but are often negative consequences by not thinking through how our decisions in this sector play out across all sectors. So the Nexus approach is trying to integrate the sectors so that we can identify upfront as we're planning what are the trade-offs and benefits by looking jointly across sectors. How we're going to do that in a more concrete implementation is that we're going to use a combination of water quantitative models with energy quantitative models, both of which capture different elements of linkages to the agricultural and ecosystem. For example, if the energy sector is depending on a certain amount of hydropower generation, that needs to be conveyed to the water sector. If the water sector falls short on that generation, how is the energy sector going to be able to adapt? And that plays out through, let's say, if we prioritize water for hydropower, what are the impacts on ecosystems and irrigated agriculture? So it's trying to think about these in a joint, integrated, systematic way. We layer on this water, energy, food, ecosystem nexus approach, something called robust decision support, or RDS. This is a category of robust decision making, you could say, robust analysis, which starts fundamentally from a recognition that the future is deeply uncertain. There are aspects of the future that we cannot assign probabilities. We simply do not know, and climate change falls into that category. What we do with, given that uncertainty, we believe what is needed to kind of plan in the face of that uncertainty is a combination of human insights. And we do this through a stakeholder consultation, and we combine human insight, human ingenuity, human innovation with quantitative, physically based models that allow us, through the combination of human and computation, identify robust strategies. What are the strategies or suites of strategies that we can use that will lead to the most security, given there are multiple objectives and there's deep uncertainty? And we do this through a systematic exploration, as illustrated in this figure, of looking at different values of critical uncertainties. You could think of these as sets of climate projections that have varying degrees of temperature, varying degrees of precipitation over time, and play those out through sets of planning options. You could think of these as scenario pathways, where we choose certain degrees of cooperation, certain emphasis on renewable energy, certain emphasis on, let's say, horticulture, as opposed to more traditional cropping patterns. If we look at these suites of planning options in the face of these uncertainties and record how do we perform against measures of success identified by stakeholders, we can analyze these results and identify what are the most robust strategies going forward, sectorally, nationally, and regionally. We do this in this project in the context of capacity building. And this is not a one-way capacity building. This is bi-directional. So we learn through stakeholder dialogue, and hopefully in the process of stakeholder dialogue, there's also learning that happens around the water, energy, food nexus and around robust decision support methods. We will have specific training programs largely around the water, energy, food nexus and robust decision support that we will carry out through the life of the project over the 5-year period. And then we will be doing some modeling, and we will be doing co-development of that model and provide ongoing technical support with the ultimate goal of leaving in the region methods and models that can be carried forward independent of the support of the project WAVE. And this is my final slide, just to talk through the timeline of the implementation of the RDS process and Nexus. And I want to give this in a sense of, in the spirit of hoping for your participation and engagement in this process. We're very early stages. We've done 3 national RDS dialogues, and we're about to have a regional RDS meeting early in November. And I'm really happy to say that I will have the privilege of coming to the region for that meeting. So I'm very excited about that. And ongoing through this process, we'll be developing the models, doing capacity building, collecting data, and engaging with people in the region, yourselves, I hope very much, with some preliminary results in the spring of 2022 and some final results in late 2022. So thank you again for the privilege of speaking today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Annette. As you mentioned in your presentation, long-term planning is the tool that will help us forecast the territorial development and its different sectoral development. The approach that takes into account water, energy, food security, and environment, or in other words, called the Nexus approach, will be discussed deeper at our next presentation that will be presented by Dr. Stefan Uhlenbrook, who represents the International Water Resource Management Institute, with me, and he's the head of the research program, CGR, Water, Land, and Ecosystem. Stefan works in the field of water and environmental resiliency and sustainability, water management, watershed management, and the research of hydrological processes aimed at finding solutions for some global challenges. In his career, he ran a number of comprehensive surveys and studies in the field of evaluating the global changes, global phenomenon on regional water resources. He has a PhD and had a habilitation in hydrology in the Freiburg University in Germany. Stefan, the floor is yours now.
Вы можете показывать свою презентацию самостоятельно.
Thank you very much, Katja, for the nice introduction. I'm sharing my screen, and I hope you can see this. If you could kindly confirm.
Да, мы видим ваш экран.
Yes, we can see it. Yes. That's
Good, and I hope you can see it in presentation mode. Thank you. Your Excellency, Ambassador Rosenboom, Dr. Sultan, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, friends, it's really a pleasure for me to be here today. I wish I would be with you today, actually, physically in Central Asia, but unfortunately that was not possible. So I would also be exciting, like the previous speaker, to go to the region anytime soon. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to say a few words about the water, energy, food ecosystems nexus, but which I would like to introduce in the next couple of minutes. And I would like to acknowledge my co-authors with whom I've been working on this for some time now, Dr. Claudia Ringler from IFPRI, based in Washington, and my two dear colleagues, Dr. Kakramun Dunjabuf and Oyture Anabov from the Bekov from the Central Asia office of IMI in Tashkent. Well, what are the key challenges? And I think Annette did already a great job in the previous presentation. There's what I can add is that we believe that, and that's not new to the majority of you in the audience, is that the different systems, the water, energy, food ecosystems, they are absolutely critical for livelihoods, for food and nutrition security, and for economic growth. And I think the ambassador did a great job also summarizing that very eloquently. These systems are strongly interconnected. If we develop systems and development pathways while focusing only on one, and only on the water resources, only on the food security, only on environmental aspects, that usually is not sustainable. All of these systems are under extreme pressure under climate change. National and regional institutions are there, but they struggle. They struggle particularly taking that non-silo approach Annette was talking about, and particularly in the transboundary case where there's a lot of interdependencies in transboundary basin, which are very difficult for national regional organizations to properly account for. But not necessarily only transboundary. In many countries I've been working on, even in so-called simple cases, the silos between the different sectors are very pronounced. Investors are there and they're eager to invest, but they're often uncertain. They don't know why and where to invest in the best way to retain forests and biodiversity, to support sustainable irrigation or clean energy, or support agro-processing. But how to do that in the light of all the other interconnectedness of systems is difficult. And my fifth point on the challenge is that women and girls and the vulnerable groups are usually the one that face the greatest consequences of non-following a Nexus approach. We will start hopefully soon in January a new program. It's called Nexus Gains. It's about realizing gains across the water, energy, food, and ecosystems systems. And it's a program that we hope from the CGIAR to start. Claudia Ringler and I hopefully will lead this program. And it's about big transboundary basins in east of Africa. So we look at the Blue Nile. We look at South Asia, that's the Indus and the Ganges basin. And we would like to study the Aral Sea basin as well. It is truly following a systems approach about understanding the systems, understanding interdependencies. It goes beyond IWRM. I think for many of us, integrated water resources management was the way to follow, but it's more than focusing on water and trying to integrate other sectors. It's by truly following a Nexus approach on equal footing, if you want to call it like this, to bring in other sectors and in a holistic approach, integrated way, manage all this together. And that brings many actors and stakeholders in, makes it very complex. So the dialogues that were mentioned in the previous presentation, we also went to some of these, and we will continue to do this. And this is so essential to bring everybody on board. We still follow a basin approach, not a country approach, that allows us to quantify. And Dr. Sultan spoke about the importance of water accounting and so on. That's exactly what you can do in a basin approach. And also to quantify upstream, downstream interdependencies, upstream countries like Tajikistan to downstream countries, parts of Uzbekistan and others, to really be able to quantify these interdependencies. Scale aspects are very important that we study, and multi-centric governance. So it's not only about governing water, it's about at the same time governing the other systems. Importance of gender I spoke about, and the political economy in any intervention is critical. So what we are after is looking at this integrated way from these different systems, and not only improve the thinking on Nexus, but it starts with being aware and start thinking about Nexus systems, but also support integrated management. It's not a pure research project. So a lot of the innovations that are in two small letters for you, for instance, we work on sustainable business models for solar irrigation, new tools for environmental flow assessments, Acro Biodiversity Index, etc. So, but it's not only to develop them or further develop these, but also to see them applied in the region. And we hope for the Central Asian colleagues to really jointly work with us on that and go beyond textbooks knowledge, but also see them applied and supporting decision-making and policy setting in the region. We recently published a thought leadership piece on that. I don't like that title, thought leadership, because it's a bit arrogant, but it was published just recently, but I'm happy to share that, which summarized some of the thinking. So in the remaining 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes of my presentation, I would like to give one example, and I lean on the great work my colleagues from our Central Asia office in Uzbekistan are doing, and that is a Nexus approach where they worked on pump irrigation schemes. So it really brings together the irrigation for food security, but also a lot of energy needs because of the necessity to pump water quite significantly. It was estimated that about 21% of all the energy generated in Uzbekistan is actually used for pumping water in relation to irrigation. Some 16% of Tajikistan, so very significant. If I understood Sultan right earlier today, he said that 20% or some higher numbers were from hydropower. So what the water sector gives in terms of energy, usually they use more for producing food. And so often we deal with infrastructure that is aged, that is not efficient, that is also the application of the water to the field is also often not up to date. So my colleagues have been working on introducing water saving technologies in irrigation, drip irrigation, for instance. And what they could show is by introducing better technology, you save water at the farm scale if you're not using the water for something else immediately, but you can save water locally. But not only water, but also you can save the electricity use, which is needed for pumping, and you can also use the greenhouse gas emissions because of that, because of the lower energy footprint we have. So it's really a triple win. And if you look at the other aspects and co-benefits that come with it, it is very interesting investment. So therefore we were very pleased to see that, for instance, Uzbekistan has issued a policy by, instead of subsidizing energy for pumping, subsidizing irrigation efficiency and technology and capacity building in that respect, to save and conserve resources instead of pumping more water and subsidizing fuel. Last slide. What I said today about the Nexus approach, what I didn't speak explicitly about it is a number of co-benefits that come with it. These are economic, environmental, social, but also gender related. And there's quite a number. It's very difficult to quantify them, but that's also something that we would like to continue in our integrated new Nexus Gains program. And I really hope that we can collaborate effectively and efficiently with our stakeholders and colleagues in the region. Very much looking forward to that. And with this, I would like to thank you, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Your presentation is very interesting. You give very good examples from Central Asia. And I would like to remind our participants that you can ask your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat so that we can address your questions to our distinguished speakers. As Stefan mentioned in his presentation, a multi-layered approach into management of water, energy, and other resources is one of the key factors for sustainable development of the territory. Let's look at it in greater detail into different approaches of water resource management at different levels at Central Asia and engagement of different stakeholders into the management process. And that's going to be done in the presentation by Alexander Nikolaev, who's a senior advisor of the GIZ program for Green Central Asia, Transboundary Dialogue on Climate and Environment and Security in Central Asia. Alexander has over 24 years of experience in the water resources and preservation of environment in Central Asia. Alexander is one of the founders of the motion of the supporters of integrated water resource management, creation of basin-based councils in Central Asian countries. He has been working since 2009 as a regional advisor of the GIZ program on transboundary management of water resources in Central Asia. Alexander, the floor is yours, and you can share your presentation with us. Thank you, Katerina. I will try to share my screen. Can you see my presentation? Yes, if you put it in the presentation mode, that'd be great.
Все получилось, все видно?
Да, Александр, прежде чем вы
Can you
начнете...
see it? Yes, before you start your presentation, Stefan, there is a question for you in the chat box, in the Q&A chat box, so maybe you could answer the question there. So Alexander, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Ekaterina, and thank you all the previous speakers and presenters before me, and who touched upon a lot of important issues on water resource management in Central Asia pertaining to economic and efficiency and comprehensive approaches to management. I was asked to focus on engagement of stakeholders into management of on the level of the river basin management in the Central Asian region. So the involvement of stakeholders is one of the important principles of water resource management in principle as part of the integrated water resource management approach and management of any other type of resources. As previous speakers said, it was planned from the beginning, and it still remains the main factor of development for sectoral management in different economy sectors, specifically water resources. And for over 20 years, the Central Asian countries have been implementing integrated water resource management as one of the most important elements of improvement of effectiveness of water resources. But you all know very well the Sustainable Development Goals to ensure the comprehensive water resource management at all levels by 2030. Specifically, they need water resource management transboundary basis. So what's the importance of this approach? First of all these stakeholders who would be involved in this process, in the decision-making process, not only should they lobby their own interest of obtaining different benefits, but they should also be responsible and share responsibility, certain responsibilities on improvement of water use efficiency and in different sectors of economy. Of course, every country in Central Asia and in the world, there are different levels of interest and certain levels of water resource management, including national level, that in general requires provision of general national security, water security, food security, energy security, and throughout all the sectors of economy, we see the security that's formed on the national level, and by that setting the overall frames for determining general goals that the government is striving to achieve. But there's also the basin level, the territorial level, local level. They're referred to differently in different levels, and even in Central Asia, they're treated differently in terms of management systems and interaction between the local and regional level, and including the water resource management. The basin level, in this case, it's presenting different implementation activities set by the government, and that includes interaction between different basins, because we have certain transfers of basin water resources, and even at the basin level, in terms of water use for local water users of different classes and different sectors of economy. At the basin level, we see the control of all these types of uses, and certain limits are established at this level for different sectors of economy, and the oversight of the use of these elements for the quality of water and so on and so forth. All the levels of control that are here at this level, including during the decision making. But for this presentation, I was asked to give you several examples of what kind of solutions where decisions can be taken at this basin level, and there's a local level as well, and usually it's a district level or lower level where we form different systems and different types of control, and we see a clear interaction between the interconnection between those levels, and it was preserved since the Soviet Union time, despite the fact that despite different reforms that are being implemented, a big part of the system, given the infrastructural basis of the infrastructure were created during the Soviet time. So it all ties to those solutions that were used at that time. So the basin councils, and that's the main institute of engagement of stakeholders into the process of water resource management. The Central Asia has been discussing this subject for a long time, and most of the countries in Central Asia recognize basin councils as one of the possible bodies to bodies of consultation, decision-making processes, and it's one of the most important a body that engages all stakeholders into the decision-making process and discussions, and thus helping divide the responsibility for any decision between state management agencies on the national and local levels. I'm not going to dwell on and take your time talking about the gains of different parties. I'm going to move on to the examples. And these examples are from Kazakhstan mainly, because Kazakhstan has been using the Basin Council for a long time, since the Basin Councils have been working in all water management areas since 2005. And I should say that all these basins are in Kazakhstan very diverse in terms of their transboundary specifics and in terms of their internal specifics within the region of those basins, because these basins may cover 2, 3, or 4 oblasts of Kazakhstan, and the territory of these basins are enormous, exceeding territories of some European countries. So the first example is the Aktalas village in Sayramsk region of southern Kazakhstan. Now it's Turkestan Oblast. In 2017, it became well known throughout Kazakhstan because of the change of the river. There was a danger of the burial grounds for cattle, and there were mining companies that used to operate there, and they were making the gravel, but they were not adhering to certain conditions, and which led to the crushing of one of the banks of the river. And for a year, the local community and local authorities were trying to raise alarms, trying to stop this activity. But since on the one hand, the guarantee this state guarantees safety of business for development, for business development in the future, and initial investments have been done. So it was a difficult issue at the time, and this issue was raised at the Aral-Sagdarya Basin Council for discussion, and it was very difficult. The deputy Akim of the Oblast attended this meeting, and the heads of the nature protective agencies, the Minister of Internal Affairs, representatives of the village, and representatives of different organizations or the organization who was accused of doing this. And I was there. It was a very long meeting with heated debates, with some sanctions and some fines and penalties. Eventually, a compromise decision was taken, which allowed to avoid contamination, the hazard of contamination of not just the river, but of the waters that fed water, the waters that were used by local villages and local population. So the catastrophe was avoided in the region. The problem was settled, and that was done only with the help of the Basin Council, because prior to that, despite all these intergovernmental negotiations and arrangements, no solution was found, and it was always skewed to one or the other side, and not everyone was happy with it. And this decision was found eventually, but this was a successful example of the solution that was found. Another example is the Aral district of the Ksylorda Oblast in Kazakhstan. That's the construction of the calcinated soda plant factory or plant. The small Sarashiganak Valley is an part of the dried bottom of the Aral Sea, and there was a question. The licensing of the environmental impact was conducted, and assessment was conducted, and was conducted by the Ministry of Ecology of Kazakhstan, that was supposed to take a decision in accordance with the environmental requirements, including technical requirements for the plants.
And it is connected to the future landfills that the factory was supposed to be built there that could be dangerous as well. Well, anyhow, the Ministry of Environment of Kazakhstan has redirected this licensing decision and has submitted it to the consultation of Aral Sea Basin. And actually, under the consultations of the Aral Sea Basin, several recommendations have been proposed as to how the situation could be improved. A technical solution was found, and another actual solution was found, which the Basin Council, in form of the consultations or recommendations, will be submitted to the ministry, and ministry will deem to be the most suitable. That was done as well. Again, it was a very easy discussion, because at the local level, the residents of the local village, Aralsk, they were against this decision, because potentially the decision could lead to contamination of a smaller Aral Sea, which is currently very important, very crucial for this region. And Kazakhstan has invested a lot of money actually in restoring or retaining some of the part of the Aral Sea, and by blocking it by a dike. And eventually the decision was taken through a number of rounds of consultations, and with the Aral Sea Basin Council, with consultation and other types of consultation. And just a month ago, official opening of the factory was announced. So it seems that a mutually beneficial solution was found. So at the moment, actually what we can see here is that in 15 years of operation action at the state level, at the state, national, regional level, the basin councils are now being used as a tool, as an instrument of taking a particular decision in terms of sharing responsibility between the stakeholders first and foremost. I mean, if they're against or if they're in for a certain decision. And this is a very good tool that helps us find some solutions for very difficult situations, so that in the future, the implications of such a decision could lead to to some consequences or implication, then you could always refer to the recommendation of the Basin Council, and that all the stakeholders agreed upon on that particular Basin Council decision, and that they consented to certain steps. That's very, very important, and it's not important here. I mean, we had actually many more cases like this, but these are the most vivid, the most outstanding issues. Or example that I use. In fact, similar issues are being discussed by almost every basin, river basin. They have to do with flooding. They had to do with some emergency or urgent response to certain situation. Even in the regional water distribution between different regions, between different provinces of Kazakhstan, that is also handled and administered by the river basin, and that is another difficult issue. And it's not, you know, unanimously addressed usually. So these issues present in each country of Central Asia, and this was example of river basin and sea basin council's operation in Kazakhstan. And actually, it's very evidentiary. And in fact, it shows that the river councils, they are a good tool, and they help regulate some of the difficult issues that occur in a certain basin area. Thank you very much. This is all I wanted to tell you. Thank you so much, Alexander. Yes, truly, this is a very important issue of engaging and bringing on board all the stakeholders and taking some joint decision that will then be implemented. Thank you very much for the examples of such positive decisions. Well, if we move forward, and Alexander has also mentioned in his presentation, the private sector in decision making, in administration of water resources at the local, the regional level. And let's look at the difficulties of bringing on board of a private sector. And Dr. Iskandar Abdullayev will make the presentation about this very subject. He is the deputy director of two institutes, the Central Asian Institute of Humanistic and Collaboration. Dr. Abdullayev has a PhD from the Tashkent Institute of Irrigation and Mechanization of Agricultural Sector. He has more than 25 years of work in managing water resources and natural resource protection in Central Asia, in Afghanistan. Since 2013 till 2019, he was the executive director of the Regional Environmental Center Central Asia. Actually, until then, he worked in the regional advisor to the Berlin Initiative of Germany on transboundary water resource management in Central Asia. Iskandar, Mr. Abdullah, the floor is now yours. We can see your presentation. Everything is well. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. First of all, let me thank the organizers for this invitation and for the opportunity to speak and to raise this issue. Myself, as Van Mohammed mentioned, I find it a bit difficult to raise this subject and to speak about it, and because about 5 years ago, no one could even discuss it, and because the water sector, especially in transboundary issues and economic, in economic supply, were highly politicized. I think now is a time when we need to think of how to make the water sector more efficient. I will be speaking in Russian, and my presentation was translated into English, so I'm sure that our interpreter will help us. Well, as for general issues that the colleagues have already raised and touched upon, then I will be speaking about some general issues. The access to water is a key human right. That's we do understand that we need to ensure agricultural sector with water, to ensure that there is water supply, that there is energy, and so it's a human right that pertinent to every individual. But at the same time, we do know that actually water affects the individual and household and economic development of the country, and that is why we do understand that even until COVID-19, that has acutely raised this issue where water supply actually was water is a key ingredient of development in our region and our countries. That is why it is absolutely important and crucial that to admit that the actually no sector can develop without any water, and the sector is a water dependent region. So in the last 2 years during COVID pandemic, we witnessed that efficient response to this kind of pandemics is the efficient water policies and water resource management systems that should have been established in every country. We see how that goes. In fact, my colleagues have already mentioned and have mentioned the challenges that our region is about to face and that are related to climate change and its impact on water resources. Last year, 2020, we had an analysis of how our countries may suffer from climate change related to water supply. And we can see that actually the implications of the climate change and the vulnerability index, as you can see, are directly interconnected. And we can see that our countries are in a very high rate in terms of dependency and vulnerability from water, vis-a-vis water resources. This is something that we need to consider, that we need to bear in mind whenever we come to managing the water resources. We need to make sure that water resource sector is sustainable, is resilient, and more efficient. My colleagues have already mentioned that, and actually I will be I'll be thinking about economic solutions that should be applied to water resource management. We do know that certain reforms are taking place, that colleagues who were the initiators or who were conducted of these reforms are now here with us, attending this meeting, attending the discussion that certain reforms have taken place, the reforms in the field of water resource management or administration, lots of resources in the field of land and water and other resources. So it's the work in progress, and actually the water sector is being reformed in our countries. One of the central issues is the financing of a water sector, funding of water sector. We're talking about the budget support. We're talking about the introduction of payment for water-related services. That's the role of private sector. But on top of that, we've been speaking more about foreign direct investments to water sectors. And that's exactly where we have some new opportunities emerging and opening up. At the same time, we do have some difficulties there too. Why do we need some financing? We do know that pretty well. And the first speakers and the next speaker, they all mentioned that water infrastructure, its maintenance, administration, servicing, supporting, long-term planning, privatization, priorities is a problem that actually hinders development of the sector and hinders development of the economy as a whole. And it really needs a lot of investment. And a certain privatization opportunities are emerging as well. And actually, alongside with some goals are being set as well. I do agree with the previous speaker, with the first speaker. He very correctly said that water so far is not a commodity. It's not being treated as a commodity at least, and that certain elements of privatization and role distribution would be important. At the same time, it is necessary to note that water sector and the science about water sector needs to be enhanced as well. Lately, I noticed that the science in water resources is losing its role, losing its significance. We're looking at some, integration and focus. Actually, these are the issues that are no longer relevant for the agriculture, for the economy. And I think it's absolutely important that the science of on water could help us, could be instrumental in finding some solutions when it comes to water resource management. As for the financial issue that are being discussed extensively, and one of the first issues here is the exploitation and support to water management system and water management system infrastructure. In most of the countries, this comes from the state budget, from the, some of it is covered by the water consumer, water users, but that's very low share of overall funding. Speaking of the situation as a whole, there have been some improvements in the last 5 to 7 years. We can say that all the countries have been demonstrating enhancing the financing for the sector, recovering the sector, but not in a insufficient amount. The almost 25 years that we have been under-financing water sector has resulted in a situation that both transport, human and technological conditions of water sector, including its infrastructure, are insufficiently supplied from the national budget. And actually, we will always be having the shortage and the deficit, and we will always face a situation when of obsolete or amortized water structures, and in a shape that does not meet the modern requirements, especially given the climate change and the need to take some fast decisions. As for the serious delays in operation and maintenance of water management facilities, water management structures, this is a very serious challenge. There are different evaluations, but according to the evaluation of the World Bank, the latest one, it is about 6 to 8% of the GDP that the country should invest to restore their water management sector up to a suitable level. And that's huge amounts of money. We're talking about from 30 to 80 billion dollars per annum. This will be very difficult to do. No one is going to invest all this money in the country, and we'll need to find a solution. As for the water sector itself, the financing in majority of cases, 50-60% actually funding comes from the state budget. Of course, they vary by level. There are some by levels, but tiers. There are some local tier funding, there are national tier funding. But at the same time, I mean, all in all, if you summarize everything, if you add it up, you will see that the water sector services fees or tariffs are very low, and they're not covered at all by the consumers or by water users, and that is why they're compensated for by the state. Unfortunately, planning and decision making remains to be in the state hands, which is a good thing on one side, but which restricts certain freedoms to another. As Alexandra has mentioned, at least at the river basin levels, at the local levels, if there is a variety of stakeholders are not part of the discussion and they don't take their role, then the funding will remain limited. As for the implementation control, the state control is pretty rigid. There were some reforms, but nevertheless, the state, within planning or strategic issues, still plays the prima violin in water resource management. And there are certain lessons that could be learned as a result of these reforms. And the message or remote roadmap for follow-up action need to be developed or should be based on all these lessons. First of all, we need to finalize all agricultural land and water reforms in Central Asia. And actually, what we have here is a matter of land ownership, land appropriation, water resource management, water resource ownership, and there are lots of some open issues, and they need to be done. They need to be handled, really. Some of the countries have finished the business, but for some, it is still an open question. Secondly, even in the countries where reforms were successful, the regulation, water sector, and agriculture, land ownership, production systems, the role of private business is significant, remains to be significant. Actually, and it's expanding lately, but it hasn't been expanding sufficiently. And I think in water sector specifically, the role of private business needs to be clearly identified. It needs to be clearly delineated, right? The role of the state is recognized. I mean, the role as a social stabilizer of state to make sure that there is food, that there is water, but we do understand that it is a very strong, it's a powerful role of the government, of the state. And in many cases, many instances, it's a positive thing. But in a heavily regulated system actually decrease or reduce the participation contribution of the private sector and their contribution to development and maintenance of infrastructure, especially infrastructure. Infrastructure is owned by the state, and the state doesn't want to let go of the reins and actually very clearly delineate where certain infrastructure could be delegated for external management, for temporary management. So there are lots of forms that could be applied, but the state seems to be reluctant to do that. Actually, there are in fishing business and recreation and then the water, drinking potable water supply, we do have that there are lots of opportunities opening up for private sector. But actually for irrigation purposes, we could also think of how we could introduce the private sector as a player, as a significant player. I'm not talking about the full handover of rights or full, ownership of water resources. No, we're not saying that, but actually the market mechanism in this kind of sector where the state is the social stabilizer is limited. But nevertheless, there are some opportunities opening up, and there's certain conditions that could be foreseen to offer some management and maintenance opportunities for private sector, of course, in limited amounts and under a very strict and rigid state supervision. And for the recommendations based on the analysis that we do have at hand, that our institute has developed, then first, we need to have the political commitment and enabling legislation. The state must be the guarantor at this level, act as a guarantor at this level to guarantee, to make sure that the involving a private sector, especially in irrigated agriculture, is possible. And it will be the state that needs to draw the blueprint, so to say. The next thing is investment climate. That is particularly important for all the sector and water sectors especially. Actually, this investment climate has significantly improved after our countries have addressed most of their water-related disputes. In fact, we have very few issues left unresolved. 5 years ago, You may remember that we've been discussing building of some technical facilities in upstream countries, but those are removed and resolved now. But if there are some private players who are interested in building the hydropower plant or maybe some water regulation or some water lock facilities and so on, I think that's a good opportunity to modernize the water management sector. We need to talk about this really openly, and because without openly inviting the private players to the water sector, we will remain in a very bad shape, and it might even deteriorate further. Another issue is that the water sector itself must finalize the reform, the management reform and administration reform that were initiated long ago. The private sector, of course, will evaluate the investment opportunities, and they will need to know how the payback is going to be organized. And of course, the water sector needs to be made attractive for the investors. It needs to prove its role and efficiency. Well, certainly, what is lacking is the understanding of the business and of the investors about the water sector. And of course, some technical and financial, institutional knowledge needs to be developed. I fully agree with colleagues who proposed that training about water sector needs to be continued, that more economic instruments need to be enrolled, not only administrative, but also economic leverage need to be applied. And of course, we're talking about public-private partnership. This has been discussed a lot, but I think it's not, we don't have enough examples of public-private partnership in water sector, and mostly they concentrate, if any, they're concentrated in potable water services. And the handover or transfer of functions are in abundance. For instance, operations and maintenance could be handled by private companies. Actually, Turkey has that, India that has that. We shouldn't be afraid of this. It doesn't mean that there will be segregation of the general public or that the services will go up in price. No, it all could be streamlined. And actually, in Uzbekistan, they have clusters. Clusters could play a role and could be entrusted with operations and maintenance of irrigation facilities. And it won't damage us, it won't cause any harm. It will be particularly helpful in downstream countries. Well, at the end of my presentation, at the end of my speech, I would like to say that the reforms in water sectors have reached a certain level of success.
Currently, the time has come for us to take care of ensuring a safe water supply so that water users get the service that they expect, and to regulate this. Deregulation should be involved here to make sure that the interest of investments into water sector grows up. Deregulation, not stronger regulation, but weaker regulation that would give the opportunities, more opportunities for investors. Economic solutions to the water sector always, and this nexus approach is very important. I totally agree with you when we approach to water management from the integrated standpoint using the nexus approach. We see a lot of opportunities to make the sector more effective. Otherwise, it would be a huge burden for the state budget and this state sector. And the next one is multi-purpose water use schemes. We shouldn't just see just irrigation or consider irrigation by itself or drinking water by itself. I think if we multi-purpose water schemes, if we use that approach, then we could also think about how we could transfer parts of irrigation water systems to other users and for other usages. And we have a lot of proposals being proposed for as part of the Nexus approach. And I think that our colleagues from IFAS have a lot of Nexus-based projects, and I think this is a very good opportunity now to lift them up to the level and to be able to go to investors to make sure that the water sector becomes just as attractive for investments as other sectors. There are, of course, political risks which we should discuss, and frankly speaking, I think that the current situation in the region allows us to have negotiations like that and successful negotiations and projects like that. Thank you. I'm going to stop with that, and if you have any questions, I'd like to take them. Thank you, Skander. And it's a very interesting subject, and as part of your presentation, you were able to show a lot of questions, uncover a lot of questions that still need to be worked on and tackled. Sultan, There is a question in the Q&A box for you. You can answer it directly in that chat box, or there's also a question in the chat addressed to all the speakers pertaining to the acting intersectoral groups. However, would like to answer this question, you could also feel free to write that in the chat. And then we have one question which is addressed to our participants, private companies which participate in this forum. Which role, what is your role, and how do you see your role in achieving water security in the region? If somebody would like to take this question, please, we will be happy to see your answers in our chat. Then we, as Iskander mentioned in his presentation, it's very important to consider the issues of science in the water sector. And because of that, our next presentation is dedicated to this. It is going to be about the promotion of science in the water sector at the regional level. And I'd like to turn the floor to Dr. Barbara Janusz Pawlety, who is a Dean for International Development on the Department of Water Resource Management of the Kazakh German University. Barbara is one of the founders of the regional master's program on integrated water resource management in Central Asia and the Kazakh German University. And currently, Dr. Pavleta is the chief editor of the regional Central Asian magazine of studies of water resources. Barbara, the mic is yours. Over to you. Thank you very much, Ekaterina. I hope that you can see my presentation. Would you be able to put it in the presentation mode?
Что мне почему-то здесь компьютер не...
Внизу должна быть кнопочка.
There should be a button on the bottom. Yeah, I think I'm clicking on it, but so far it's not working. Just a second. There you go. That's great. Now we can see it well. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you for this brief introduction, an introduction of me, and thank you for all the previous speakers before me. I think that everything we would like to achieve in integration of water and energy and agricultural and environmental sectors, let's just put it this way, of this nexus interaction interconnection. If we have people capable of that knowledge, if we have knowledge that would allow these people to make proper decisions and to promote this, to be able to achieve sustainable development goals, including those on water and energy, be achieved for the region of Central Asia. I'm gonna skip my slide here, and I'm not gonna say a lot because we're very short on time and my colleagues are already done this for me. It is important just to emphasize how many climate-related risks exist today and how important it is to look at where and how to distribute water to make sure that everything is done jointly with engagement of all stakeholders in order to ensure water security. My topic today is dedicated to the generation of these young people who look at themselves and see themselves as not decision makers or those who can change everything around, but those who will definitely experience difficulties, all these difficulties in the future. We'll also look at those who today give us some certain knowledge and use science-based and use evidence to support business and national local regions decisions in terms of nexus and water resources. This is an important gap that exists today between the science and education in a lot of countries of Central Asia. And there's a huge gap. We can still see the heritage that we have from the Soviet Union with the academies of science and the research institutes to work on science, but the professors at academia, although we're seeing these requirements already, but there's still a lot that needs to be done to make sure that this is successful. So it is important to look at these gaps today and to look at the gaps between the knowledge that we have to generate these gaps and this knowledge and to introduce it and include it in education curricula to make sure that these young people who go out to the market are prepared to be on this market and are prepared to satisfy demands of this market. Quite often we lack some educational materials in the national language that would allow for students to gain modern knowledge that is available primarily in English right now, and it is available in a lot of countries that would be able to share experience, but this is unacceptable for our readers here in this country, in the countries of the region, universities and other research institutes because of this language barrier. What's also draws attention is that over this long time that I spent observing this sector in this area, we can see that there's still a deficit and a lack of a transdisciplinary approach. There's no transdisciplinary approach in our research, in our education. We don't talk about one. It's not just water and solving problems, water-related problems through water resources, through just solving those problems in isolation is not possible. We have to do everything comprehensively, and this is the principle that the science should adhere to, and this is the principle that the education should adhere to as well. Our university education, higher education. There's also another big problem, uh, which is there is very little support for research, scientific research, especially by young experts, and we can see that there are no specialized or programs or incentives that would attract the youth, as was mentioned earlier, into the system to work in the system and develop in the system. But without monitoring, without modern data, without relevant data, up-to-date data, without the observations and analysis uh, of this sector, this long-term, this sector cannot be developed in a long run. Quite often we see that the young generation or the older generation of researchers have this problem of isolation between systems, so let's say the Western system of conducting research and what we have left from the previous scientific system here, given the fact that knowledge and there is knowledge and the reason. It's the question of conveying this knowledge in the language to be understood and globally available for academic discussions that take place in different countries, including Central Asia, but with the small involvement of the Central Asian countries. And funding, I think everyone can talk about very little money available for the actual research in Central Asia and by researchers in Central Asia and for researchers in Central Asia. To make this picture bright and look brighter, I would like to emphasize a huge potential that exists in this region, that there are young people, and if we look at the recent statistics, if the population of Central Asia in the global context accounts for only 1%, with its 74 million people, we can say right away that this is a very young generation. On average, it's less than 30 years old, and this is what the old world can only dream about. That we're countries with only 20% of population that are younger than 30. And some countries have less than 50 to 60%. So it's a huge human potential. That's why we have to look at the standards in the educational system that are being introduced in the educational system together with the Bologna process, together in cooperation with the European countries, the United States, and such as programs as SPEAR. And it's very important to engage and involve Central Asia in this huge potential of this discourse that's taking place globally. And there could be several programs based on that. We have several programs in the university, but it's not just our private opinion. And I think that are sharing this opinion and discuss it on a regular basis with our colleagues from other universities as well in Central Asia and all leading universities that work with water issues and trying to find links with other sectors as well. And some of you are probably aware that there's a certain academic society network which also has supports different partners that, and some of them we're presenting today, and we hope that this context of Nexus context will become part of thinking of the experts here. So recommendations, and let me share with you some recommendations. It doesn't mean that they are important or they're prioritized here. They just exist, and I'm listing them the way they are. And maybe tying it to the last presentation by Iskander, it is important to develop among the youth and young experts, the students, the thinking of how I independently, within the context of private and public partnership or different other types of available forms, how can I, as an economic sector, develop internally. So I'm talking about economic aspects of management of water sector and their interactions and interrelations with other sectors. So the initiatives that exist today, the business incubators, accelerators of this thinking, where students can develop their projects and gain support from a lot of international partners, that's very appropriate today, and it gives a possibility to continue to develop and to develop this sector multilaterally from the multilateral perspective. Another important point is enhancement of university curricula. I know that a lot of our partners and ourselves, we are involved in discussions like that and this pilot projects to develop the academic curriculum. And they're developed. Of course, there is a big gap in that in the last 20 years, we haven't seen many not very much has been done within this context in the last 20 years. A lot is being done now, but it's important to focus not just on technical specialties, on engineering, on those who do help this to develop this water sector from the standpoint of technical issues. But we should not forget about this nexus approach as well. And it's integrated approach or nexus approach. It doesn't matter, but what is important is that water and energy specialists and people in the environmental sector, for them to understand that without this interaction, they will not be able to continue to develop, and our curriculum should include that and count for that. This is a very complex, complicated process because it has to go through huge systems of the ministries of education. UNESCO plays an important role in this. The division of UNESCO for water resources for Central Asia. We all understand how difficult this process is and how we need global umbrellas that will help us achieve this understanding among the representatives of the governments and ministries. I would like to emphasize the importance of the research experience in the field. There's very little, maybe due to financial deficits or maybe due to other problems. There are very few opportunities for students at every level of bachelor's programs, master's or PhD programs of actual field work. And from the standpoint of natural resources, preservation of natural resources, interaction with other sectors, this is very critical to make sure that we give students our bachelor's or undergraduate students to be able to go out to the field. And I would like to ask the private sector, international organizations and regional organizations for us to give them an opportunity to participate in this pilot projects, research projects for our students to be able to be part of it. It's possible, it's doable, and that could be arranged. Three more additional recommendations pertaining to the strengthening of the academic potential and scientific potential, more than academic potential. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that there is a need through science and education to strengthen this transdisciplinary approaches to research. It is important to, we believe it is important to make sure that this research is available today. And the journal or the magazine that Ekaterina was talking about, this is a journal that has been that was created several years ago for Central Asia with the help of partners in Central Asia that is published in Russian and English. We're slowly getting access to all recommended sources in Kazakhstan and Russia, and hopefully in the future it will be widely available. It's a necessary process because there are a lot of knowledge in the countries, but we don't know about each other. Because we publish it, it ends up in magazines which are not always available to everyone, as particularly to international colleagues, to ensure such an exchange of knowledge. And we have to teach how to write, not what to write, but how to write, from the standpoint of this format that we were talking about, how important it is today to be able to write using the language of global academic exchange. And the second and third recommendations are about the mission of universities and scientific institutes and research institutes, particularly from the standpoint of such huge changes of the 21st century that were triggered by coronavirus and a lot of other changes such as climate change, etc. The universities should be local. They should be able to understand local requirements. They should be in contact with local communities. With as an example of basin councils, they should be represented there as well, because if we as researchers don't know what's needed, if we don't know that, if we don't hear that from business and private sectors, from the population and public, from the state, then our science and our educational programs are not going to be in compliance with, or will not satisfy the needs of today. And another thing is the dialogue and exchange. It's important, and quite often it may be supported by universities themselves, because we, in all the countries of Central Asia, we have this potential capacity of conducting these workshops and activities that would allow to gain new knowledge from international partners, from private businesses that would be conveying information from the private sector to the public sector, and using the database of knowledge that our universities have, and we hope that it will continue to grow. Thank you very much and with this presentation, I wanted to thank you for paying attention to the subject, and I hope that in the future, without this interaction, not just of Nexus, but from the standpoint of sectors, but all of us as stakeholders in academia and decision makers and private sector, it will be very difficult for us without this approach to achieve sustainable development goals and development of the sectors. But I am certain that with this huge growing generation and capacity of this generation, abilities of this generation, we will be able to achieve that. Thank you.
Позитивной ноте, что у нас есть
Thank you very much, Barbara. And with this positive note that you said at the end, that we do have the new generation that will be addressing. So with this positive statement, we will be finalizing our session. Unfortunately, we do not have any time left to take the questions and to answer the questions. And each of the presentations that were introduced today deserve to be discussed for another 90 minutes. And despite we paying only 10 to 12 minutes to the speakers, we do have the answers in the chat box. We do have the answers in Q&A that have been answered. So if you are interested, please do look at the questions, simply answer the questions. I would urge you to answer the questions. Well, summarizing the results of our today's session, I would like to note what we have discussed today. Well, first of all, Central Asia depends on the efficient water resource management, and the virtual world plays a key role in developing the trade balance in the region. Meanwhile, the issues of water resource management can no longer be handled separately from other sectors of the economy, and they need to be considered in the context of interaction and in the basis of a nexus approach. It is only the nexus approach that can help improve water resource management in the region. Also, long-term planning, forecasting, and development of the most optimal, of the most suitable scenario, most beneficial for all, can be an instrument of decision making, as well as development of the regional collaboration in Central Asia. We looked at the follow-up development of management institutions on the basis of contribution from all the stakeholders in decision-making process, again, at all different levels, at all different tiers, that may all facilitate an agreed-upon decision-making and finding of the most suitable platforms. Bringing on board of the private sector into water resource management, development of green businesses, finding of the most optimal financial instruments to develop the sectors of the economy that are linked with water resource management should also become a priority for the countries of Central Asia. And certainly, the science advancement, raising the new generation of scientists, water specialists, water scientists, who will help us improve the water resource efficiency, energy resource efficiency, and agricultural produce too, will help us achieve scientific evidence-based decision making that will ensure the most optimal scenarios of development for the countries of Central Asia. Well, these are all the issues that we managed to consider during the almost 100 minutes of our sessions, and I would like to thank all the speakers for their very interesting presentations. Well, clearly, many issues remain unanswered, and they require to be discussed even further. And given the complexity of the issues and given the challenges of this topic, under the regional program of the USAID on water resources and environment, we launched a number of lectures on Nexus approach and other new advanced approaches. Please find us on Facebook and please join our future lectures. Well, we will be taking a pause now. We do have 15 minutes of break. The next session will start at 12 o'clock sharp. And we look forward to seeing you at the next session devoted to trade in electricity and opportunities of investing in renewables in Central Asia. Thank you once again, and thank you, dear speakers, and we look forward to discussing all of these issues further. Well, I hope to see you at 12 o'clock sharp. Thank you. And thank you to the interpreters. Thank you.
Добрый день, уважаемые участники.
Good day, distinguished participants of the Central Asia Trade Forum. I am very glad to welcome you at this session. I know that just now a session was over that was related to sustainable water resources. And many participants of this session mentioned that water resources in Central Asia is interconnected or inseparable from energy resources. And we will be speaking about the energy, electric energy in our region and development of renewables, as well as attraction of the investment to the sector. Well, before we start our session, I would like to make several administrative issues. All the presentations are being pre-recorded. You will be able to see the presentations afterwards. We do have simultaneous interpretation, so please make sure that you select the according language, the language that you will be speaking. Many will agree with me that energy sector is the driving force of the economic development. We do know, we do understand what's happening with the energy market, what kind of resources are in short supply and how that affects the energy sector. Okay. And let's speak about our region. So energy sector, electric power is a very difficult, complex type of commodity because you can't really store it, you can't really touch it, but you can't really exist without it. And the regional market of electricity has several important functions and important characteristics. Today, with our experts, we will speak about the situation with the energy sector in our market. We have invited highly professionalized experts from our market and from beyond, and we will discuss what could be done to improve the situation.
Баян Абулкаировой. Она является заместителем
For her
руководителя.
for first opportunity to speak, I would like to give a floor to Bayan Abulkairova, who is the Deputy Director of the Energy Institute, and she's very experienced in energy, renewable energy resources, tariff formation. So, Bayan, the floor is now yours. Good day, distinguished participants. I'm very happy to be attending this event, and in my introductory presentation, I would like to speak about the prospects of regional collaboration in the field of electric energy. Could you please run my presentation? Thank you. It's not a full screen yet. And if we could go to the next slide right away. USAID has been very actively supporting the initiative of establishing the regional market and of electricity in Central Asia. The idea and the goal of establishing this kind of market is to create the most beneficial conditions for a market, for a free market in the trading electricity and to ensure mutual collaboration between the countries of Central Asia. Each country has the objective and the goal of ensuring economic growth, energy security, and reliable energy supply with the lowest expenses. And to that end, it is the market, this kind of free market of electricity offers significant benefits, such as the opportunity to attract investment, to modernize the grid infrastructure, to the competitive market will allow the companies reduce the electricity tariffs, and that will eventually lead to financial, stable, and sustainable energy sector. But in order to form and to create the electricity market, we need some time and we need to go through some stages, such as introduction of commercial foundation of trade, development of transparent and functional trade platform. It is necessary to bring on board some institutional support, and we need to have some system coordinators. And that will, of course, require some significant efforts to develop an agreed upon legal and regulatory reforms to enable the successful formation of the energy market. What's important in establishing the electricity market of Central Asia is the political will of the country, as well as successful coordination between the government. Of course, we do need the international financial institutes who would finance and co-finance some of the project, whether who would finance and fund the infrastructural project, institutional project, and who could also support the institutional legal reforms of the sector. We need to attract the investment of the private sector, and clearly, we need to take into account the best international practices. Well, going back to the history, then the unified energy system was established sometime back in the 70s of the Soviet Union times. And since the energy system was unified, then a certain balance between generation of electricity and consumption in water was ensured. However, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when countries announced and declared their independence, the energy systems got separated. And at the moment, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan, who continue working in parallel as a part of a unified system. If we can compare the electricity trade data from the Soviet time and with the current situation, then transboundary trade makes up only 10% of the trade that we had during the Soviet times. Lately, the situation with the electricity trade is changing in the region, and there are some different times, and there are sometimes a deficit. I mean, we used to have profited, but now we have the deficit or shortage of electricity. The countries reaching hydro resources due to climate change have entered the water shortage years. I mean, when they don't have enough water for irrigation purposes. The climate change and intense ablation of glaciers create risks of further reduction of hydroelectricity generation. However, at the same time, following the global trends of shifting to low carbon economies, the countries of Central Asia plan to initiate the plans of energy transfer and transformation of the energy sector. And this leads to a situation that the prices for renewables is declining all over the globe, including, and our countries are not being an exception. Today, everyone understands that development of renewables and development of regional trade are the most efficient tools, the most efficient instrument to address the inter-country trade in electricity and to improve their relationship. Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are already investing heavily into renewables and developing. We do know that successful auctions have been conducted and have been introduced back in 2018, and it is the third and fourth years that the trade auctions, electricity auctions have already been conducted. Actually, the Uzbekistan seems to be very successful in obtaining very low prices for the renewable energy. But the growth of renewable brings its own difficulties, brings its own challenges, and the risk for sustainability or of the balance of the electric system. And of course, we need to come up with some balancing capacity in order to be able to stabilize those peaks or off times created by renewable energy. And to that end, the establishment of the Central Asian electricity market is very, very important because it may offer this kind of services and products such as electricity, or you could sell transit services, and you could also come up with auxiliary services that could be traded across the border. With the purpose of ensuring energy security, the countries of Central Asia began paying more and more attention to benefiting from the regional cooperation. At the moment, Tajikistan is currently considering joining the Central Asian energy system. Turkmenistan is considering joining the Central Asian energy system. The grids are being actively built in Central Asian countries, and countries currently understand more and more that you need to sell the maneuvering capability as well as the auxiliary services, especially for such countries as Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan. And to that end, it is necessary to establish an intergovernmental competent authority body that would handle this regional trade, including the issues commercial, such as issues like commercial, technical issues, and so on. And to that end, I would like to mention the USAID support. Actually, thanks to the regional support to this market, in 2019, the USAID launched a project to support the establishment of CAREM, Central Asian Regional Electricity Market. And the next speaker will be speaking about that. This project, the USAID Energy Central Asia, was launched in 2020. And the main goal of this project is to help countries of Central Asia achieve their national and regional energy priority. And another objective is to create economic benefits from the regional trade in electricity, and to help alongside the normative establishment of a normative framework, legal framework, enabling the regional electricity trade. So the project, the current project on establishment of CAREM, will continue its work under the new project. I mean, so there was the previous project that was launched, but actually there is a new project that will be effective for 2025. So this project has three key objectives: the reforms of the national market. When we speak about reforms of national market, we imply the improvement of the national energy strategy, reforms of the electricity market, legal normative regulation, as well as tariff formation, issues of modernization of the utility services, as well as development of the regulator of the electricity market. The second objective refers to clean energy. Now, with the stress on renewable sources of energy, with the stress on energy efficiency, and to that end, the USAID's project, the Central Asia Energy, ensured the support to promotion of low carbon development, support to auctions and other different procedures related to trading and buying electricity from renewable sources of energy. What comes in here, it's the zones of renewables, institutional development of renewables, power purchase agreements, and so on, and generally creating conditions attractive for the investors to invest and come and invest into renewables. The third objective, or the third set of objectives, will be dealing with all the areas, all the aspects related to establishing the regional trade of, in electricity, and that is establishment of a CAREM, creation of conditions for transboundary trade in electricity, ensuring open access to grids, I mean, to generation and transmission grid, as well as development of the model of Central Asian regional electricity market, and as well as development of different normative and technical aspects. As for what we plan is to establish the CAREM in 2027, and therefore this project will continue working actively in this work for another 4 years. This is the brief that I wanted to provide about this project. Thank you. Bayan, thank you very much for your presentation. And, you know, not to go too far, but there is a question to you as a lawyer. All of our countries are from the Soviet Union by birth, right? And you say that now the electricity exchange is only 10% of what we had during the Soviet time. Do you think what legislative barriers or impediments exist which prevent the countries from increasing the trade in electricity? Thank you, Sergey, for your question. Well, first and foremost, I think we need the political will of the countries. All the issues related to normative and legal regulation can be addressed, can be solved, provided the countries agree upon the mechanisms of cooperation and collaboration, provided that the countries can agree upon the structure of the CAREM, of the market, provided that they can agree upon the mechanisms of market operation. I think the issues of legislation in the field of taxation, of custom clearance, custom regulations, export and import regulations will need more attention from the countries, I believe. Well, the countries in Central Asia, they treat electricity as a commodity, and there are some general principles of regulating electricity as a commodity. For instance, the customs legislation, they look at electricity as a commodity. But at the same time, in order to create the Central Asian market, we need to look at all of these aspects in more detail. It actually is true about the forex regulation or market structure will need to be addressed. There are some bilateral trade agreements that will have to be taken into account that will have to be addressed as well. And, you know, provided there is will, there's always an opportunity and anything is possible. And to that end, I believe that we do have to establish an intergovernmental coordination authority that would include not only the system operators or the ministries, but also the representatives of other ministries to address and to solve all of other issues, whether those are commercial issues or pricing issues or other issues. Thank you. Well, you mentioned several times the political will as a key factor. I mean, provided the political will occur, provided the countries see the benefit of the regional trade. But in order to speak about the benefit that the regional market brings along, I would like to invite the next speaker, Armen Arzumanyan, who is the head of the Future Energy Project, Central Asian electricity market project as well, who has worked not in our countries, but also in Africa and Europe and in many other countries on many issues related to electricity. And I invite you, Armen, to speak with your presentation. The floor is yours.
Да, Армен, мы видим вашу презентацию.
Yes, Armen, we see your presentation. Please start. Thank you, Sergey. I have a tiny technical issue. I am trying to switch to the presentation mode.
Да. Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much, Sergey. And thank you to Amaya for your Bayan for your presentation and for the introduction of the project of the regional market of energy in Central Asia. The issue of benefits is becoming one of the main issues, and we should see some positive attitude of the countries to get interested in it. And before I move on to my presentation, I would like to once again talk about the main concepts that Bayan describes, like Karam and why now, because the issues of development of the Central Asian market have been discussed for a long time, but unfortunately we haven't seen a serious advancements or serious progress in this. Moreover, after the split up of the Soviet Union, the power generation field of the countries of Central Asia has seen some nationalism. That was caused by the separation of economic or the split of economic ties, unstable operations of the Central Asian system, lack of rules and disciplines, which was most important, because influx and payments and accumulation of debt at a certain time created serious tension between the players of the Central Asian energy system. Why now? As Bayan mentioned, there have been serious changes in the technology, and we've seen new technologies which are pose a serious competition to traditional conventional sources of energy. Those include renewable sources of energy, which are now significantly cheaper than the the traditional sources of energy generated by traditional power stations. There's no more need for financial support for development of renewables, and the economy of this technology is self-supporting and self-sustainable. The second trend is serious growth of consumption and a lagging of the development of the sources, and the countries that experience deficit are more and more seeing the deficit throughout the year. It could be seasonal, it could be annual, and some of them already calculate plans that show serious deficits unless we see a development of generation in the near future. And these conditions create the foundation for integrated work. And on top of that, to a certain extent, we were able to tackle issues of discipline, including payments for inflows which occur in the Central Asian region. So the preconditions to create for a creation of CARIM, that's the combination of sources of thermal and hydro generation. They ideally complement each other. The whole Central Asian region, in terms of electrical energy or power energy, has been developed as an integrated system that accounted or took into account these different sources or resources, and it was created as an optimized system for the use of capabilities in each country. Some countries generated coal-based energy, so these are using basic infrastructure. Others were developing hydropower stations where this resource was abundant, and they were providing more regulating capacities in terms of coverage, etc. National energy systems are already interrelated. In other regions, when we talk about the markets, we have to talk about significant investments into the grid. And in the Central Asian system, the grid or the transfer system, which is ready to be launched for the launch of the regional market, already exists, and no significant investments are required at the initial stage. It is, of course, as the market develops, and this will require additional investments, but it has to be a correlated process. There is a regional organization which performs technical coordination, is responsible for technical coordination, and based on this institute, we can create sustainable and prepared regional institute, which will be responsible for the work of the regional market. As has already been mentioned, the transboundary flows went down to 10% of the Soviet level. So the potential is significant here. And as I already said, it all leads to the situation where the regional market has serious capacities to increase revenues. The objective of this project is to increase the transboundary flows, the transboundary trade, reduction of regional expenses related to delivery of energy, and improvement of safety of energy delivery, and creation of systems which would allow to use the least expensive resources and they which will ensure the reliability of power supply because the players of the regional market will always be able to use these resources provided by neighbors in case of a deficit, internal deficit. And one more objective of the project is a reduction of emissions, CO2 emissions. The engagement of private investments, or the attraction of private investments into the national energy sectors. Implementation of the market will allow to implement large, and we'll talk about that, large projects which sometimes don't fit into national strategy or development plans. So they have a regional nature. They have a regional type and an increase of the growth of national flows. So the objectives or the activities that we try to implement as part of this project, that's market design that was prepared and presented and adopted by the participants, detailed market rules, which countries will use to operate on the market once this energy market is introduced, and they have already been prepared and submitted and presented, and we're going through the last round of consultations with the participating countries. And then it's followed by the activities, arrangements, coordinations, approvals of regulatory documents that will allow us to launch this market within a short term. As Bayan said, we have to make sure that the issues, taxation issues are taken care of, and as well as customs issues are taken care of or tackled. And this sometimes national legislations, as I said, of the countries under enacted certain regulations that limit export and import transactions. So this is the whole list of issues that we're considering today, which have to be changed and amended in order to open the way for the regional energy market. I already talked about why Karam. This is a country diversification of primary energy resources, and they match ideally if we look at them from the standpoint of regional resources and consider them regional resources and use them in an optimal way. Obsolescence of infrastructure of national energy systems and generation and transmission. The region possesses significant capacities. The transfer capacities which are not used to the full extent, and of course they can attract investments for upgrades and renovations, and similarly, the situation similar to power generation. Open market will allow us to reduce prices for energy, and optimal use of resources will yield this result. And the growth of revenues from the sale of excess energy, including a significant source. It's a significant source of foreign currency inflows. An increase of energy efficiency and cost reduction, optimization of the work of the regional energy system lead to the reduction of costs and increase of effectiveness, and expansion of export opportunities which will help grow the development of the system, and that will develop the renewables not as a source, but also the possibility of some countries to support the development of such sources in neighboring countries, because as already has been said, some countries adopted serious set serious objectives on the development of renewable sources of energy, reduction of emissions. However, they don't possess sufficient flexibility on the part of in terms of generation in the system in general. Some countries have this flexibility and they can provide their services and provide significant support to the development of renewable energy sources. The potential benefits of transboundary energy trade, that includes reduction of variable costs. And here I should say that we consider the economy only based on the variable costs. We didn't look at the additional costs or additional benefits that could be gained from providing the services and from dividing reserves and increasing the reliability of power supply. But nonetheless, these issues also play an important role. Reduction of the CO2 emission volumes due to effective dispatching. Here we talk about the increase of effectiveness of specific blocks, as well as the use of pure sources of energy. mutual support during emergency situations or incidents that will reduce the volume of under-delivered energy or reduce the time of operations during the unstable mode. Trade of auxiliary system services. This is the part of benefits. This is the benefits that was not quantified. However, it is still very important because, as I said, it includes flexibility, it's a balancing power, it's a balancing energy, and it regulates the frequency and purity in the region. And this is what the players in the market in Central Asia are already talking about. Reduction of the cost of long-term reserves, maintenance. So this is one of the sources of benefits when countries divide amongst themselves the volumes of reserve stocks that are necessary to ensure reliable and stable operations of the energy system. And as I said, a possibility of constructing a regional projects which are too large for a given country, one given country. How did we assess economic benefits of CAREM? Here I'd like to say that we created a model of the work of the regional energy system, which considers its operations for the next 10 years, and we modeled both based on the current state and the growth of load and the changes of the load curve up until first capacities as planned by the governments of each country, both in terms of generation and transmission. So the model of the energy system takes into account development of the regional energy system and allows to calculate expenses to cover the load schedule. And we see the benefits during regional dispatching when we compare two modes of operations of the energy system for this 10-year period with transboundary trade and without transboundary trade. And the difference between these two values is the economy which can be achieved in the region if the region chooses to integrate and the regional market starts operation. To assess the work of the energy system with transboundary trade, we took into account all liabilities and obligations of the countries on export and import of energy with a long-term nature that includes the CASA 1000 project exports to Afghanistan, and CASA 1000 is about exporting to Pakistan primarily. In addition to that, the model that we used allows us to optimize the use of water resources. The model, we use the scenario-based approach in the model with consideration of many years of water flows in the main rivers of the region. And we considered different scenarios of development of water volumes that would be available in these rivers, given the competitive use of water at in agriculture, industry, and other sectors. In addition to that, the program allows to optimize the use of water with a multi-year horizon, within a multi-year horizon. So water in water reservoirs is not used on an annual basis, but is considered as for the long-term use, for the long-term planning, so that we don't have significant discharges or serious deficits of water, stockouts of water during dry years, and the discharge of water during years with lots of rains. So such an optimization and integrated work of energy systems in the region allows to significantly reduce the discharge of waters, unnecessary discharge of waters from dams and the power stations in the region. This chart shows the extent, the difference, and the possibility of water discharge in case of an isolated operations of the energy system and integrated. The blue line shows the significant annual discharges of water if the system works in isolation. And in case of an integrated work, the curve goes much lower. And with the experts from the region, it goes even further down. So what are the should also be monetized by introducing the market, energy market in the region. So an average annual economy or savings for the region would be about $227 or $28 million a year. With transboundary trade relative to no transboundary trade. And on the right, in the column to the right, you see the share of this that the benefits from CASA 1000 benefits account for. And the CASA 1000 project is looked at based on the cost of energy. So we don't account the negotiated prices that would be achieved by the countries, or maybe some countries have already achieved, such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. We realize that they will be much higher, and the benefits from the regional trade will also be much higher at about $230 million. That's the capacity of the regional integration. And implementation of the market doesn't require such significant expenses, and countries can achieve this much faster. Thank you very much. And with that, I'm gonna stop my presentation, and I am ready to entertain any questions. Thank you, Armen, for your presentation. So the list of benefits that you listed is impressive, and sometimes we have a question, so why don't our countries use this opportunity? And so they miss out on a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of questions, but I would like to remind to our presenters to please stick to the time schedule, 10 minutes for presentation, so that we have time to answer all the questions in the end.
So our countries are a little different. Kazakhstan says that we will reach 15% of renewable share in the overall electricity in 15 in 2030 and 15 in 2050 and so on. Uzbekistan also committed to building about 800,000 sources of renewable energy, but it's not all that easy. And the problems and the challenges, as well as solutions that could be undertaken to build these renewable sources of energy and to use them. So to listen about all of those things, I would like to propose the next presentation that will be made by our colleague Pramod Jain, who is the president of the Innovative Wind Resources of the US, who has a 20-something years of experience in the renewable sphere and energy efficiency sphere, in the field of digitization, and he's been working in our region for quite a while now, both in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, in all of these areas. So Pramod, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sergey. So I will start by talking about why renewable energy is interesting in Central Asian region, and what are the challenges with integrating renewable energy into the grid of Central Asia. So if we can show the next slide, please. So in Central Asia, we have seen a sharp drop. The next slide, please. Renewable energy has come very late in Central Asia compared to the other countries in the world. And here I'm going to specifically talk about wind power and solar power. So within Central Asia, Uzbekistan is leading the charge in terms of the lowest tariffs and the lowest cost of generation that has been obtained. And here I'm indicating 3 projects that were auctioned recently in Uzbekistan, and the cost of generation of electricity is extremely low. It's, let's say it is about 1.8 US cents. So this is lower than the cost of a new power plant. It could be coal or a gas power plant. And not only that, it is also lower than the operating costs of these plants, meaning if we were to just look at the fuel cost that is incurred by existing coal or gas power plants, their cost is higher than 1.8 cents. So what we have observed is that one of the main impediments to higher penetration of renewable energy was, well, they cost too much. Well, that impediment has been taken away. So the costs have dropped and they are below the cost of conventional power. Obviously, what this is leading to is a rush to invest in the renewable energy sector because the costs have dropped. The second item is, because the costs have dropped, this has become a very hot investment sector around the world. So there is plenty of money, plenty of financing available for renewable energy projects. In addition, governments have set up some aggressive renewable energy targets to achieve decarbonization and net zero carbon emissions in the power sector. So all these forces are leading to very sharp increase in renewable energy deployments. And the clear challenge now is for the Central Asian power system to deliver this renewable energy in a cost-efficient and a reliable manner. So clearly on the procurement side, we have obtained low costs. Now the question is, can this power, renewable energy power, be integrated into the grid? So that is the main topic of my presentation. If we can go to the next bullet. Yeah. So no, previous slide, please. So the USAID programs in Central Asia are providing technical assistance in these 4 areas. First is setting up basic knowledge base and basic standards for what is a high quality renewable energy power plant and how these standards should be applied to all new power plants, new renewable energy power plants in Central Asia. The second item that we are providing technical assistance on is how should we plan the deployment of these renewable energy power plants through RE zones, and what kind of upgrades should happen to the grids, to the transmission grid, and to the other generators in the grid. The third item that we are providing technical assistance on is how should the system be operated? What are the new practices for operating a system, a power system, in which there is a large amount of penetration of renewable energy? And the last item, which has been discussed extensively, is how do we trade power so that we can achieve higher penetration of renewable energy in the system? Next slide, please. So let me talk about what do we mean by grid integration of renewables. Next point. So there are 2 aspects to integrating renewables into the grid. One set of issues are related to connection-related issues, which is how do we connect these plants to the grid? And by that we mean, is the quality of power that is output by renewable energy plants of good standard? Do we have enough capacity in the system at the substation level and at the transmission level to absorb renewable energy power and to transport it to the consumption centers. The second aspect of grid integration is how do we operate a grid? And by operating a grid, we mean how do we balance renewable energy with other sources of energy? Because we clearly know that renewable energy is both variable and uncertain. And by variable, we mean that renewable energy production happens when the sun is shining, let's say between 7 in the morning to 5 in the evening. And after that, we don't have renewable energy. The same thing happens with wind. We have a wind energy only when the wind is blowing. So how do we then use the other sources of energy, like coal, like gas, like hydro, to complement renewable energy? And that means balancing of renewable energy in a millisecond time frame, seconds time frame, minutes, and so on. So these kinds of issues are studied through a multitude of sort of power system studies. And I'm classifying these studies into two. One is project-specific study, when a single project wants to connect. Then there is an interconnection study that is performed. And the second type of study is to understand how much renewable energy penetration can happen on this grid. And for that, we do a multitude of studies, and the 3 studies are listed below. Next item, please. And the key item that relates to the cost of grid integration has to do with how do we balance renewable energy in these different timeframes. And I'm going to discuss that next. So next slide, please. Next point. So let me take an example, and we'll take the example of Uzbekistan, where the cost of procuring renewable energy in one of these projects is 1.79 US cents. The next cost that is important is the grid integration cost. And the grid integration cost could be in the range of ½ cent to 5 cents. So internationally, when renewable energies were new to the grid, we have seen costs in the US, in the EU, which were initially in the range of 5 US cents per kilowatt hour to integrate renewables. Over time, those grids have learned, have made changes, and now the costs have dropped to ½ cent per kilowatt hour. So the question really is, in Central Asia, what best practices should be implemented so that we see costs close to ½ cent per kilowatt hour and not see grid integration costs that are much higher. So what I will talk about next is what are the strategies for reducing the cost of grid integration, because clearly that is becoming the key factor in ensuring that renewables are able to deliver energy to the grid at a low cost. Next item, please. So here, it's a complex table with a lot of elements, but here are some of the strategies that have been listed for 4 different scenarios. When we have low renewable energy penetration, the impacts are very localized, and the cost to the grid is not very high. So with 3 kinds of interventions, like local upgrades to the system, to the substation or the local transmission line. Next is introducing renewable energy generation forecasting at a system operator level, system operations level, and then introducing grid codes so we get quality projects in the grid. And the behavior of the renewable energy plants is acceptable to the grid. As the penetration of renewable energy goes higher, we need more interventions and more expensive interventions. And the highest cost interventions end up being in the flexible generation area and the reserves area. And that is where the focus has to be very high in terms of how do we reduce the additional cost of flexible generation and reserves when we integrate renewable energy. Next slide, please. So here are the key messages on grid integration for renewable energy. When the grid integration is done poorly, it can result in significant curtailment of renewable energy generation, meaning the grid is not able to absorb the amount of wind and solar energy that is being produced. So it asks these plants to reduce the generation. Now that is clearly a suboptimal way of using renewable energies in the grid. The second impact when grid integration is done poorly is that we will see larger imports and exports. And when imports and exports go beyond the contracted amount, then the costs start increasing of imports and exports, and there are other integration issues. The third item is when it is done poorly, we end up using expensive peaker plants, meaning expensive fossil fuel plants that use heavy oil, and that clearly not only increases the emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, but it also increases the cost. And then we can see poor reliability and so on. So the recommendations are for Central Asia is to develop a roadmap, because as I had shown in the previous slide with the table, because there are so many moving parts and there are so many types of interventions that can be done, there needs to be a clear roadmap of how this grid and how the grids in Central Asia are going to integrate renewables. And this starts from adopting best practices from grids with high renewable energy, developing a vision and a strategy for integrating renewables and associated policies, and then assigning activities, upgrade activities to different parties in the grid. The second recommendation is to conduct studies where we can understand what are the options that are available, what are the lowest cost options, and in general, how can this be done so that the grid reliability is not impacted. And the next point is very important, which is through grid code and through rules of integration, we need to have renewable energy plants do a lot more to the grid in terms of providing services that traditionally they have not provided. So they are better citizens in the grid. So they essentially help the grid to perform much better. The next item is to modernize the grid. Clearly, renewable energy creates a high amount of dynamics in the grid. There is a lot of changes that happen minute to minute in the grid. And for that, the grid needs to be digitized so that the manual processes are taken out and smart systems can help manage the grid. The last one is to adopt a regional approach, which has been talked about extensively. So this covers my presentation, Sergey, and I'm open to questions.
Да, Промод, большое спасибо.
Thank you, Pramod. Thank you very much for your presentation. Yes, thank you for the evaluation and assessment. Yes, I mean, the costs, the number that you gave us, they're impressive. The cost of electricity generation, solar, is 1.7 kilowatt an hour, right? Or integration from 0.5 to 5 only cents per kilowatt hour. And the question, who is to carry all these integration related expenses? Should those be those who built the solar plant or wind plant, or should someone else take care of all these expenses or other burdens such as dispatching, having the service, having the studies, digitizing the system to make sure that they could be adequately integrated? Who is to handle all that?
Thank you, Sergey, for that question. Typically, the costs internationally are broken down into two categories. So the first category is costs that are directly related to the renewable energy plant, meaning directly related to the connection of the renewable energy plant. So if there is an upgrade to the substation where the renewable energy plant is going to connect, or there needs to be a new transmission line that has to be brought to the substation, that is considered within the domain of the renewable energy plant itself, and hence the plant has to bear the cost. but other costs related to balancing are considered as the cost of operating the system. And hence the system operator bears the cost, which means the cost is spread to the entire grid. And that's why it becomes really important for system operations or the system operators in these systems to efficiently integrate renewable energy and to lower the cost of integration. Because it is a system-wide benefit of how you balance the grid, how you take care of reserves. So that responsibility is with the system operator.
Спасибо за ваш
Thank
ответ.
you. Thank you for your answer, Pramod. We do have many more questions, but let us give other participants of our panel discussion to come up with their presentations, and maybe they will cover some of the questions already, and then we will go back and have another Q&A to you as well. Thank you. We spoke about the problems, we spoke about the challenges or benefits that are granted in Central Asia, that will be provided to Central Asia, provided we establish the Central Asian regional market. And we would like to know about other regions, what we could learn from other regions and what we could apply in our Central Asian region. So for that, I would like to invite our colleague, Alen Zendrat. She's very experienced working in Central Asia and other regions. He has worked in more than 25 countries for 35 years. He was also the staff of the USAID and worked at the Energy Department and Energy Infrastructure and Climate Change Department. Alan, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Sergey. I'm going to talk briefly about the benefits and trends with international power trade. During my presentation, I'll call it CBET, cross-border electricity trade. Next slide. So basically, there are a large number of studies of the effects of cross-border electricity trade. And most of these studies are very clear in showing that there are tremendous large benefits to CBET. They show, for example, in the International Energy Agency study of cross-border trade, they found that cross-border trade allows economies of scale. They found that it allows larger resources to be developed. It provides countries that don't have good resources access to excellent resources. And it also can improve energy security and lower the cost of balancing. Next. The British electricity regulator, Ofgem, did a study of their trade with the continent, and they found pretty much the same thing. They found that it improves the efficiency of trading. It has large commercial benefits. They found that the single market of Ireland trading with Britain improved the use of interconnections. So basically, we see that two studies so far have shown that there are significant positive benefits of cross-border electricity trade. Next. The World Bank did a study of the potential of cross-border trade in South Asia, that's with the Indian subcontinent, and they found that there would be large savings in fuel costs. The investments are relatively small compared to the savings, and so the net savings are quite large. Next. Now, we all know that many countries have complementary demand patterns. And so one thing that cross-border trade can do is it can even out the demand patterns. If you have peak demand in one country and low demand in another, they can trade energy and more efficiently use their generation and transmission fleet. Next. We've seen the same outcome in Latin America, where they have a limited transmission line. It's just basically one line system that runs through the entire region. And a study was done of that and found that they could increase the trade by 29%, and that would provide about a $2 billion gain to the region. Next. Now I'll speak briefly about the impacts on carbon emissions and also on how renewable energy fits into the international trade situation. So the World Bank study of South Asian trade found that there would be significant reductions in carbon emissions due to the trade. That is because the hydro generators and now the wind and solar generators could supply more of the demand, and the thermal generators would supply less of the demand. Next. So let's just take one of the, or two of the global example that most people know about. It's Switzerland and Denmark. Switzerland, of course, has used their excellent hydro resources for export for many decades. They export flexibility to the EU. More recently, they have developed pumped storage, and they buy electricity late at night to pump water up and then sell flexibility during the day. This has resulted in billions of dollars of revenues to electricity generators in Switzerland. And we've seen the same pattern in Denmark. Denmark now, at one point, they reached 135% of their domestic demand in wind generation. And in 2017, their electricity exports were $8.4 billion. So you can see that this is a very beneficial industry. Next. Now, what about renewables and CBET? Well, first of all, if a country has excellent resources, such as Kazakhstan's wind resources, or Uzbekistan's solar resources, and of course, Turkmenistan has both excellent wind and solar, those could be developed at a large scale, and part of the output, if it is cheap enough, could be exported to neighbors. And of course, some of that output will have complementary characteristics for the neighbors. There may be a lot of wind in the wintertime. Second, it is also possible to trade balancing resources. The hydro generators could be selling valuable flexibility services to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. That's already done in places like Norway and Switzerland. Similarly, the best resource locations like Kazakhstan's excellent wind locations could serve the entire region. And then some final thoughts on CBET and clean energy. As an earlier speaker noted, renewables now are cheaper than the operating cost of thermal generation in many countries. Developing renewables would allow the use of the highest value resources regionally. It would also allow the trade in balancing and ancillary services, and it would make resources available when they are the most valuable. So for example, hydro generation could be used for flexibility, and wind could supply the winter energy needs of the region. So with that, I'll close, and I'd be happy to respond to any comments or questions.
Спасибо, Алан, за вашу презентацию.
Thank you, Alan, for your presentation. A question right away. The hydropower may compensate or balance out or improve the work of renewables. And we know that in Kazakhstan, we have very ambitious plans on construction of renewables, and in Uzbekistan, they lack flexible generation. So the logical question is maybe we could use hydro resources in other countries, such as Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan. However, can they use them? And maybe what's the point for them? What's the benefit for them in using these resources? Can you give us an answer to this question?
That's an excellent question, Sergey. Usually the resources that are used to balance or to manage frequency and voltage are paid at higher rates. So that means that, for example, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan could sell hydroelectricity at prices that are somewhat higher than their baseload rates.
Хорошо. Насчет
Okay, that's clear about hydro resources. They're very quick, they're very maneuverable, but can countries with excess gas resources use the same? And maybe there is a capacity for the room for growth there as well. How could that be done, and how could they be paid for?
Yeah, in fact, most of the generation resources have some degree of flexibility. For just as an example, the EU and India use their coal fleet for flexibility. In India, they did a test of the coal fleet, and they found that 1/3 of the coal units could actually flex 1% or more per minute. So, one of the important things is to test the flexibility of the existing fleet, and then to provide incentives that compensate for selling that flexibility. Gas is often used as a flexible resources in simple cycle gas plants. That's, for example, what is used in the United States extensively. Now, those gas plants run on a simple cycle basis are expensive, but they are actually one of the lower cost ways of balancing wind and solar.
Спасибо.
Thank you. I see that some countries in the region have the potential not just to sell power, for example, gas generated power, but also participate in regulating this and obtaining much better rates and prices. Thank you for sharing this international experience with us, which is impressive. And we see that in a lot of countries, a lot of regions benefit from regional cooperation, which achieves billions of dollars. Here, it's a little modest, but it still looks very attractive. But now I would love to talk about the national experience. Here in Kazakhstan, we have an operator, a market operator here, who's been working in Kazakhstan for a number of years now, but it really improves power trade, improves our wholesale power market in Kazakhstan. And I'd like to turn the floor to Alexei Doronin, who is a managing director of the Kazakhstani market of energy market, who would say a few words about our Kazakhstan experience and how Kazakhstan experience can be expanded and rolled out to the Central Asian region. Alexei, please, the floor is yours. Thank you, and good afternoon, dear forum participants. Let me thank the forum organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak today. In my presentation, I'm going to talk about Core MJSC, about the development of centralized energy trade in Kazakhstan, about the main measures that Kazakhstan takes to develop the centralized trade market. And I will talk about the general steps and creation of the general regional energy market. And I will also talk about the renewables development issues in Kazakhstan, because it's becoming more and more relevant currently in the international relations. the operator of centralized energy trade is the Kazakhstani operator, or KOREM, and the unified centralized platform was created as a tool to develop competitiveness in electric power and aimed at determining market price for electricity. The main activities of KOREM to contribute to development of market relations and energy generation, and improvement of effectiveness of the wholesale markets. And in the 2000s, we created a community and centralized sector of power trade at the organized platform. Since January 2002, KOREM started the market of centralized energy trade. In 2006, KOREM's shares were transferred to, by the resolution, the government would transfer to the management. In 2021, the 100% of shares were transferred to the Ministry of Energy of the Republic of Kazakhstan. Over its existence, the KOREM launched centralized spot trades of power throughout the operations, and trades for average months and year period, centralized electrical capacity trades, auction trades on renewable energy, auction trades for projects on energy utilization or disposal of waste. According to the Entrepreneurship Code of the Republic of Kazakhstan, the two services KOREM provides to ensure preparedness of the trading floor for centralized trades, and the service of organization and implementation of centralized electricity trades provided through the markets are under state regulation. Developing the functions of the operator of centralized trade market and organizer of this renewables trade, KOREM is a key chain in development of electricity market development. The capacity of KOREM should be used not just to support and defend the interests of the market players of the Republic during formation and functioning of the electrical and energy markets of the Central Asia, but also provides other services to ensure development of energy sector of the Republic of Kazakhstan. In its activities, the operator of centralized trade should not focus on gaining of profits due to contradictions with objectives. Therefore, all the revenues should be directed to maintenance and development of centralized trading floors and services. Based on the availability of multiple years of experience, KOREM provides services and digital services for the market players. Our company continues to develop this sector. We're currently working on creation of services for system operator and power generators aimed at improving reliable delivery of energy to energy consumers. Trades on import and export of power in Kazakhstan, aiming at improving transparency of export transactions and improvement of export capacities and potential of the market players here. Services for auctions for land use and carbon users, which is aimed at improving transparency and increasing the bonuses, signatory bonuses.
В конце прошлого года и в начале текущего года Агентством по развитию конкуренции Республики Казахстан совместно с ООО «КОРЕМ» была проведена большая работа по оценке состояния конкуренции на оптовом рынке электроэнергии Казахстана. По результатам данной работы были разработаны меры, направленные на повышение конкуренции на оптовом рынке. Одной из таких мер стало принятие решения о введении норм по обязательному участию всех электрических станций на рынке централизованных торгов. Согласно пункта 48 Общенационального плана развития Казахстана, начиная с 2022 года объемы централизованных торгов электрической энергии будут ежегодно увеличиваться, оказывая влияние на снижение концентрации оптового рынка. Значит, с 2021 года 10%, 2022 20, 30, ну и так далее в целом по годам. Текущий статус. Проект соответствующих поправок к закону об электроэнергетике сейчас находится на рассмотрении парламента Республики Казахстан. Также принято решение о введении обязательной продажи на экспорт электроэнергии через централизованные торги. Традиционными покупателями электрической энергии ЕСРК являются Республика Узбекистан и Киргизская республика. Экспортный потенциал сейчас у нас оценивается в объеме от 1 до 1,5 миллиардов киловатт-часов. Согласно дорожной карты развития регионального рынка КОРЕМ, проект ЮСАИД «Региональный рынок электроэнергии Центральной Азии», финансируемый ЮСАИД, и реализуемые компанией Тетротек направлены на обеспечение долгосрочной энергетической безопасности и экономического роста региона, а также создание платформы для расширенного регионального энергетического рынка стран Центральной Азии. Проект КАРЕМ реализуется поэтапно. На начальном этапе осуществляется содействие странам региона в переходе к более скоординированной, синхронной работе систем электропередач.
By increasing the bilateral energy trade. And then we create we should create a platform for operations and which will help countries in developing a competitive regional energy market. The regional energy market will foster not just reduction of costs and stronger economic stability, but will simplify commercial transactions and attract investments into energy sectors of all the 5 countries of Central Asia and neighboring Southern Asian countries. And the main objective for us is to improve the safety and reliability and effective use of potential of generating capacities of the region due to mutually complementary sources and the volumes of trade of energy and contribute in signing transactions between countries of Central Asia and Afghanistan and Pakistan. We're currently considering 2 options of organized market management. One is creation of a regional system operator and the operator, a market operator in one person, then creation of 2 different operators, a regional market and a regional system operator. To implement the second option, we would need to look into the following issues. First of all, the function of the regional operator of the market and the modes, how these activities would be coordinated with the regional system operator. We need to consider the way to coordinate the energy markets of Central Asia with their completely different models and rules of trade. The general electricity market of which participants along with Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and Russia and Armenia are members of, which is the model of decentralized energy market based on bilateral contracts and the platform for centralized trade of energy. When we look into these issues and gaining answers, COREM is ready to consider its possibilities for a regional trade of energy and present a coordinated presentation. Present the results. The reason why COREM doesn't consider the use of the model that is accepted for the general energy market for the countries of the Economic Union, which would allow us to mitigate problems of trade coordination, and despite some advantages, it would be correct and appropriate at this stage as a solution. Creating a common energy market of Eurasian Economic Union is one of the important steps in integration processes of Eurasian space. The formation of this market is aimed at transition to market-based pricing and ensuring fair competition.
В рамках создания Высшего Евразийского экономического совета главы государств
In May 2019, the heads of the country have signed an international agreement on forming the unified Central Asian market. The document identifies the main frameworks of its development, and also identify the bodies who will be responsible for the common electrical market of the Union, its participant as well as infrastructural organization, as well as ways of trading the electricity. In the upcoming years, the development of rules of the general electric market will be finalized. These will be the 4 documents that will actually regulate the relationship electricity-related issues between the members of the state, electricity trade, and transfer of electricity. The agreement about electricity, at the moment, in the CIS countries, there are 3 electricity trading partners: the administrator of the trade system, Russia, St. Petersburg International Stock Exchange, Stock Exchange, and our company, COREM. In the last 10 years, the international agenda to reduce the CO2 emissions is gaining importance. The sector whose operations are related to coal burning actually are blacklisted among the investors and are losing interest in the market. However, in 2017-2018, the investors began avoiding investing in fossil fuel and actually extraction of the coal, and in 2019, any capex related to coal extraction is under threat. including the environmental initiative allowing for development of particular product. 2021 became the year when international banks and investment companies began policies enabling reduction of collaboration with companies who are somehow related to coal industry. At the moment, the sectors who are directly linked to coal may be banned, and actually there is rate that cement production, metallurgical coal, cake, and oil. Well, in the absence of alternatives, the gas seems to be the interim fuel that will be used in the upcoming future. The Republic of Kazakhstan supports the development of renewables. The law on support of renewables was issued in 2019. However, only further amendments and perfection of this law that took place between 2013 and 2017 gave really feasible impetus to development of renewables in Kazakhstan. Alexei, please slow down. That was a request. I'm trying to fit in 10 minutes that were given and to give as much information as possible. Yeah, I apologize. I could, of course, slow down. Yeah, but then I may not be able. Yeah, but they need to translate everything you're saying. That is why please make sure that you do not really hurry. In 2013, the mechanism of the state support to renewables was launched, and that is based on centralized guaranteed purchase of all electric energy generated by the renewable sources of energy on a certain fixed price. In order to support the accounting and financial settlement and accounting center was established on the government, and that way this settlement center becomes the centralized buyer of electricity, of renewable electricity, on behalf of the system operator, grid operator. The center signs contracts, and actually it regulates the contracts with the duty to buy out all of the generated electricity. Introduction of fixed tariffs was necessary to allow the renewable sector to develop and evolve in the country. They also help to attract the investor, and also the secured and was a safeguard against intervention in renewables project implementation. Another responsibility for system operator was introduced to ensure connection of the new plants to the grid and releasing or exempting the renewables from the certain taxes. So the law was passed, and as a result, some preferences were granted. They are cleared of custom fee, they're cleared of tax, and as well the state in-kind grants were allocated. In 2017, due to increased number of investors who are willing to implement the renewable project in Kazakhstan, demanded that a mechanism was established that will ensure fair and just selection of projects. To that end, in 2017, the Republic of Kazakhstan, on the basis of our trading platform, introduced the auction sales for building and development of renewables objects, thanks to which the process of project selection became more competitive and more transparent. So in 2020, the renewable project now made it to the list of priority investment projects. And investment preferences that were ineffective before, some new preferences are added, such as exemption from the property tax, from the land tax, from the corporate added value tax, VAT. The term of the offtake contract is extended up to 20 years. The measures of state support that were introduced in 2013 showed to be efficient, proved to be efficient, starting from the establishment of the Accounting and Settlement Center and up to COREM launch. 1994 new projects were launched in renewables, which ensured annual growth of 29.8% of renewable electricity, and the capacity grew from 94 megawatts to 1,922 megawatts in 2020. As of now, Kazakhstan has 124 renewable venues or objects, and their established capacity is about 1,222 megawatts, including wind power 601, mini hydropower plants 280, solar plants 230, biomass plants 7.2 megawatts, and the share of generated electricity of renewable electricity in the total generated electricity makes about 3.5%. Meanwhile, according to the data, according to the auctions data, we expect that 70 new renewable electric power plants will be commissioned in the upcoming year. From 2018 up to 2020, the 1,219,000 megawatts project worth of projects were selected, including 355 wind, 455 of small hydropower plants, 320 of solar power plants, and 15 megawatts of bio. Starting 2018 and up till 2020, we see the reduction of auction prices for electricity generated by the renewables and under offtake contracts as the overall continuation of a trend of a cost reduction related to building and developing a renewable electricity plant. Well, according to the open data analysis, the investors in the renewables mostly represent energy sector, including the sector of renewable sources of energy, as well as oil and gas sector. The volumes of financing by types of renewables in billion tenge in the period of 2011-2020 was about 187 billion in wind, 149 in hydropower plant, and solar made about 37 billion tenge. Well, all in all, 367 billion tenge were invested in renewables. Actually, the investors from yours are usually subsidiaries of some large-scale electricity generation companies or energy companies who specialize in renewables, as well as manufacturers of equipment and spare parts for renewables. The financing of renewables is mostly offered by development banks. According to the analysis of some individual projects, the financing, the interest rate, the scheme of the financing is 70/30, and that's the most widespread scheme, and of which 70% is financed by the borrowed funds, borrowed money. The number of renewables projects with local participants is made 63%, where the capacity of this project was about 41% of total capacity. 63% of all renewable projects were built by local investors or funded by local investors, including some small-sized projects up to 10 megawatts. However, when looking at the established capacity of the project, then the share of local investment of renewables, it drops by more than 20%. The share of capital participation from China, Germany, and Italy, as well as in joint projects of Kazakhstan and the UK, increased from 30% to 40% from the total established capacity of renewables project. This way, we see that foreign investors are mostly interested in implementation of large-scale projects in Kazakhstan. Alexei? Oh. Thank you very much for this presentation, for the report. We're impressed by what our market operator does, and this is very impressive. We wish you all the best, all the success, and we hope that the experience, your experience, can be used in our Central Asian region for the development and as a contribution to the regional market, electricity market in Central Asia. We don't have much time, but I have perhaps a couple of very interesting questions that I would really like to ask. Well, question. Do you think the situation in Afghanistan may, and if it does, how is it going to affect our electricity market? I would like to address this question to Armen Arzumanyan, because he is the one who works closely with our market issues and the collaboration with Afghanistan. Armen, if you're ready, if you could take this question. Yes, thank you for this question, Sergey. As I mentioned earlier in my presentation, in the volumes which are accessible for the regional trade, we took into account all the volumes that were booked under fixed contracts under CASA 1000 project. However, if this project is to be delayed or is to be postponed, then it may lead to freezing of a certain volume of electricity, especially in Tajikistan, because Tajikistan was the one aggressively, positively aggressively developing its hydropower generation. Okay, Armen, could you turn on your video, because we cannot see you? Yeah, there I am. Here I am. Okay, please continue. And should the project CASA 1000 be delayed, and should that delay lead to a more serious need to enhance integration processes, because otherwise there will be some discharges of water as well as loss of cheap resource that could have come from Tajikistan. So the really situation with Afghanistan seriously affects and actually demands introduction of Central Asian electricity market in Central Asia. So it makes it really urgent. Thank you very much for your answer. There's another question that was asked by several participants of our forum. was development of nuclear power in the region. We do know that Uzbekistan has a plan to build a power plant. Kazakhstan has been discussing it. Could anyone clarify the advantages and disadvantages that come along with building of a nuclear power plant? Armen or Alan, if you could speak about international experience. Armen, maybe you could start and Alan could complement your answer. Yes, please. Clearly, the growth of consumption as well as energy independence or security pose this question, because the countries are already facing the deficit and shortage. Kazakhstan, in fact, has already declared that the shortage of electricity supply will be noticed in 2030. Uzbekistan has mentioned that gas available for gas generation of electricity will be in short supply as well. And to that end, the nuclear power plant seems as a good solution. I mean, it is a solution. It is a political issue, really. It is an issue that needs to be addressed at the political level. But nuclear power plant is a very expensive resource. I mean, comparably expensive resource compared to the technology that we do have available to us. Therefore, optimization of the existing infrastructures and developing the program enabling optimal, efficient development of the sector might be important in taking an informed decision. I think that will be the end of my question. Thank you. I do have a question to Alan. Well, we do see in our presentation that trade in electricity is really low. I mean, it's been mentioned that it's only 10% of the previous trade turnover, electricity trade turnover. What do you think are the main reasons? What do you think are the main barriers to increasing electricity trade in the region?
Well, I think that when the trading system that was established under the Soviet Union fell apart, countries wanted to ensure their energy security by controlling their energy resources internally. So that was a very logical step to take at that point in time. However, I think that now we can see that the complementarity of resources in Central Asia is tremendous. It's large. The hydro resources could be used for flexibility and balancing, as well as for ancillary services. So one of the barriers that everybody knows about is that you have to pay for ancillary services and flexibility. And there is a reluctance to pay the higher rates that are needed to incentivize flexibility. So that's one thing. I think a second point, Sergey, is that renewables are just this year and last year getting to the point where they are cheap enough to possibly be tradable. So we've had 3.5 cent wind in Kazakhstan. We've had 1.7 cent solar in Uzbekistan. At those costs, you probably could start trading in those two energy sources. So the cost decline has been an important factor.
Большое спасибо, Alan.
Thank you, Alan, for your explanation, for your addition. Well, we do see that in Central Asian region, we do have this huge, humongous, really untapped capacity to improve and to intensify the regional electricity market. There are some benefits that need to be taken advantage of. I would like to thank all the speakers, all the participants, to wish you all the best. And I hope that you will continue participating in our efforts to improve the regional electricity market. Well, I also ask you not to go too far from your computers, from your gadgets. There will be another very interesting session called Digitization, Transport and Logistics. With that, I would like to wish you all the best. Thank you and goodbye.